Chapter 282. In the garden house in the northern part of the city, the garden house was filled with palm trees and was brimming with the scent of spring. The unique courtyard was surrounded by fragrant flowers and plants. Several maids carefully shuttled back and forth between the flowers, trimming and watering the fragrant flowers. On a soft lawn, eldest Prince Charles was squinting his eyes as he talked with a boorish-looking man with two crisscrossing scars on his neck. The man was about 1.75 meters tall, but his hands and feet were large and he was incomparably sturdy. His eyes shone with the light of a savage beast. "Mr. Lear, you shouldn't have challenged 3 great swordmasters as soon as you arrived in Ossen City. After all, you came from the Brut Merchant Alliance. Our country is an extremely xenophobic one. If my father knew that you were one of my people, it might affect his impression of me." Eldest Prince Charles frowned in displeasure. He was very angry at Lear Kane's unauthorized actions. Lear Kane grinned and said arrogantly, "Your Highness, although I've pledged my allegiance to you in Lancelot Empire this time, I don't necessarily have to listen to everything you say. First of all, I'm a swordsman. Since I've come to Lancelot Empire, according to my habit, I must exchange pointers with the local experts. Otherwise, how can I improve my swordsmanship? Damn, what a boorish fellow. If you have the guts, go challenge Sacred Swordmaster Karl Ascot. I'll see how you die." Charles inwardly cursed and his expression became even more unsightly. He said to Lear Kane, "Let's forget about this matter. I hope you'll tell me before you do anything next time. Do you still remember that Brian I told you about last time? He's the one I wanted you to help me kill." Lear Kane was startled. He thought for a moment and nodded. "Oh, he's the kid you mentioned who practices a special martial art? Why, has he appeared in Ossen City? Do you want me to go kill him today?" Shaking his head with a wry smile, eldest Prince Charles said, "The situation has changed. Brian's reputation has soared after he challenged several experts in the past few days since he left Ossen City. I don't know who released the news that Brian returned to Ossen City with the goal of challenging you. As soon as this news came out, all the nobles and experts in Ossen City began to pay attention to it. You've been cultivating in the garden house all this time, so you might not know, but now even my father seems to be interested in this matter. It's not very appropriate for you to secretly kill Brian at this time. I think it's better for you to take the initiative, directly challenge him, and then kill him. This way, no one can say anything. What do you think?" "No, I've decided not to. Who do you think I, Lear Kane, am? How can I lower myself to challenge a brat who's still wet behind his ears? If he's interested in challenging me, then I'll gladly accept the challenge. But I absolutely can't go to his door and challenge an unknown brat." Lear Kane resolutely refused without the slightest leeway. Charles, who was sitting in his chair, fiercely grabbed the armrest and cursed inwardly. He thought, "If you don't have a bit of strength, then damn it, I'll immediately have someone kill you just because of your attitude. You're just a brute, yet you dare to contradict me repeatedly. All right then, many people are paying attention to this matter. There are even some people loitering outside the garden house these past 2 days. I'm guessing they're waiting for Brian to come and challenge you. It's not convenient for me to come and find you, so be careful. If Brian comes, you must kill him immediately to avoid future troubles." Charles was a bit annoyed. He stood up from his chair and said to Lear Kane, "Don't worry, he'll die without a doubt if he dares to come. Youngsters these days really don't know the difference between life and death, to actually be so arrogant and conceited. I'll let him understand just how strong his seniors are." Lear Kane snorted coldly. Under the influence of those with ulterior motives, this news quickly spread to every corner of Ossen City. At first, only a few of Ossen City's experts and nobles received this news, but when someone elevated this matter to the glory of the nation, even the commoners heard of this news. In this way, Han Shoror's birth and origins were gradually torn apart and revealed to the world. A young slave, relying on his astonishing talent, had been accepted into the Empire's best Babylon Academy of Magic and Force as an exception. In less than 2 years, he had advanced from a lowly magic apprentice to a rare archmage necromancer, and was even equipped with a miraculous martial technique. All of this news added together confirmed Han Shoror's name as a genius. While Osun City was abuzz with discussion about this matter, a few large merchant guilds had already begun to secretly place their bets. The crazy gamblers expressed their intense attention to this matter. Among them, the matter of the Boot Merchant Guild betting a huge sum of money to oppose Cameron's merchant alliance was something that no one knew about. Late at night, Osun City's west side. Of the 4 major blocks, the west side of the city was the dirtiest and poorest. This could be said to be a gathering place for commoners. Trash was everywhere on the streets, and flies and bedbugs were everywhere. A few scantily clad beggars were curled up in a dark corner, dozing off. A stench lingered throughout the year. However, no matter how poor a place was, the moonlight wouldn't favor one over another. The cool and bright moonlight shone down, elongating the shadows of Han Shoror's party longer and longer. The lights in the surroundings flickered, and a few suppressed sobs could be faintly heard coming from the simple and crude houses. I really didn't want to come to this place. Chester's expression was heavy as he sighed. Although Emily stayed in the carriage, her black eyebrows were deeply furrowed. Her tender, white, and smooth skin was as bright and clean as white jade. She wore a jeweled ornament on her head and a well-fitting silk dress on her body. She seemed out of place in the environment of the west side of the city. Emily had seen Chester's information and knew that he was born a commoner. In his early years, before he entered the Dark Mantle, he had lived in the west side of the city for a period of time. However, Chester obviously didn't miss those days. Thinking about it, no one would miss such a place. All right, let's leave as soon as we finish our business. Every country has its rich and poor. This has never changed since time immemorial. We have no way to change all of this. Han Shoror sat in the carriage and lightly shouted through the curtain. Behind the carriage that Han Shoror sat in, a small troop of 100 knights followed at a moderate pace. In the narrow streets, the troop of 100 knights formed a long line. Hurry up, we don't have much time. Don't complain, Emily also urged. Chester didn't say anything else. He skillfully drove the carriage along the quiet streets. After passing through this street, he headed straight for the dirtiest and most remote area of the west side of the city. After a while, Chester slowly stopped the carriage in a place where sewage was everywhere and the stench assailed his nostrils. He turned around and said, "Lady Emily, those dilapidated buildings in front of us are the place mentioned in the information." Inside the carriage, Emily changed into a black robe that covered her entire body in front of Han Shoror, concealing her identity as a high-ranking member of the Dark Mantle. She slowly got off the carriage and looked ahead. She said to Han Shoror, "According to the information, it should be those buildings in front of us. The enemy is from the Angela Empire. Their leader is called Yolland, and he seems to be a sky rider." Nodding his head, Han Shoror released 3 yin demons and slowly snuck inside. He walked towards the troop of 100 knights at the back and instructed an officer, "Don't act rashly and alert them. Spread out and surround all those buildings. Approach them slowly. If anyone tries to rush out, capture them alive if possible. If that doesn't work, kill them on the spot. No matter what, don't let a single one escape." "Yes," the officer replied and turned around to make a gesture to the knights behind him. The knights gradually spread out and surrounded the buildings from a distance. In the center of these knights, there were a few mags who were originally surrounded. Due to the knights' dispersal, they gradually revealed themselves. The mags of the Northern Guard's magic department were mostly intermediate or advanced mags. There was only one Thunder Archmage. Before they came to carry out the mission, they had received Boris orders to listen to Han Shoror's commands. Originally, these people were still a bit rebellious. However, after they learned of Han Shoror's identity from Boris, they all became well-behaved. Not a single one of them dared to disobey orders. In the span of a few days, Han Shoror had traveled across more than half of the Lancelot Empire and challenged several notorious experts. In the end, all of them were killed by Han Shoror on the spot. This kind of cruel and merciless method cemented Han Shoror's fierce reputation, causing all of these people to become well-behaved. A person who could kill several experts wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Not to mention that he had received full authority from the highest commander of the Northern Guard, Boris. They wouldn't be foolish enough to provoke Han Shor. All right, find your positions. It's best if you stay in the middle of the knights. Listen to my orders later and attack with your strongest magic. Han Shor swept his gaze over the Thunder Archmage and instructed. Understood, Lord Brian. The Thunder Archmage nodded respectfully. He wasn't angry that Han Shor had stolen his position as the leader of the magic department. Chapter 283. Before Han Shor joined the Northern Guard, this lightning archmage named Kyria was the leader of the Northern Guard's magic department. However, due to Han Shor's appearance, he had no choice but to listen to Han Shor's orders. Originally, Kyria was a bit unwilling, but after Boris spoke to him privately, he immediately understood that Han Shor had only joined the Northern Guard to accumulate military merits. He knew that the magic department of the Northern Guard was only a springboard for Han Shor. With this, not only did he not have any complaints, but he also purposely tried to curry favor with Han Shor, hoping that when Han Shor soared in the future, he would be able to help him. Be careful, there are over 20 people on the other side, and all of them are quite strong. Han Shor instructed the people behind him, then returned to Emily's side and reminded her softly. Understood. What do you think we should do? Emily nodded and asked for Han Shor's opinion. When the 100 knights surround the area, immediately use magic to destroy all the obstacles. Capture these 20 or so experts if possible, or kill them all. As long as we can find the blueprint, this mission will be considered complete. Han Shor thought for a moment and said lowly, "Let's do as you say. The Northern Guard seems to trust you more. You need to command them well so they don't mess up." In front of Han Shor, Emily was already used to him being the leader and said obediently, "All right then. Pay attention to Yolande, don't let him escape." Han Shor replied as his body slowly floated into the air. Han Shor was like a ghost as his body quickly weaved through the knights and mags. Relying on the omnidirectional vision of the 3 yin demons, Han Shor continuously issued orders to the knights around him, telling them to abandon their horses and hide in different directions. Over 100 knights separated by 150 meters, slowly surrounding the opposite side. Standing proudly in the air, Han Shor calmly commanded the knights and mags of the Northern Guard, arranging suitable people in every corner. Everyone softened their voices and slowly approached the dirty, dilapidated building. Gradually, the 150-meter distance shrank as the encirclement shrank. When the two sides were only 50 meters apart, Han Shor suddenly waved his hand at Kyria and the others. When Kyria and the others saw Han Shor's movements, they immediately started chanting magic spells with solemn expressions. "Sir, we've been surrounded. I've heard strange sounds." A wind mage said anxiously to the tanned, tall, and muscular Yolande, who was riding a violent tattoo beast. "How is this possible?" Yolande, who was resting, abruptly sat up amidst a pile of weeds and hurriedly looked out the window. His expression changed drastically as he bellowed, "Everyone, gather. Find an opportunity to break out." In this room, a group of more than 20 people calmly stood up when they heard this. One by one, they drew their swords and sabers and prepared to break out of this place. As the leader, Yolande remained calm in the face of such a predicament. His space ring glowed faintly as he took out the blueprint that he had painstakingly obtained and carefully placed it in a crack in the wall. Yolande said in a low voice, "The brothers that have come this time are not afraid of death. I will place the blueprint in that crack in the wall. If any of you are able to leave alive, you can wait until Ossen City is no longer on guard and come back to take the blueprint back to the Empire. Do you understand?" "Don't worry, sir. We know what to do," the wind magician replied solemnly. The other people in the room all had resolute expressions on their faces. They were already prepared to sacrifice themselves. Suddenly, 5 bolts of lightning struck down from the sky. The zigzagging lightning illuminated the pitch-black night sky. A few walls of fire appeared around the room. The scorching heat assaulted them head-on. The earth began to rumble and tremble as sharp spikes abruptly appeared. Yolande and the others in the room understood that the attack had begun. They all jumped out from the windows and doors one by one. Under the attacks of the lightning, fire, snakes, and earth spikes, they scattered and began to break out of the encirclement. Kill. Han Shoror's cold voice resounded throughout the night sky. Killia's lightning bolts crashed down, bombarding the houses and causing them to explode one by one. 2 assassins who had rushed out were struck by a bolt of lightning, their bodies convulsing and collapsing on the spot. The 100 knights of the Northern Guard were all elites of the army, and all of them possessed the strength of a novice or intermediate knight. Under Han Shoror's orders, they all lined up in an orderly fashion to block off the road. As soon as they discovered anyone charging in their direction, they would immediately and unceremoniously intercept them. Send 3 knights from the north to stop them. Kyria, send 4 experts from the Ministry of Magic to attack the south. Yolland is in the west. He's a sky knight. Those in the west, be careful. Using the vision of the 3 yin demons, Han Shoror calmly commanded. He was always able to accurately estimate the strength and number of the enemy and send out the corresponding experts to intercept the assassins. Under Han Shoror's commands, Emily and Chester slowly approached the direction of Yolland's charge. As a thief, Chester wasn't strong in direct combat. Thus, he stayed with the knights in that direction to intercept them. Emily stood behind the knights, ready to attack with dark magic at any time. Damn it, how did the enemy know our movements so well? Yolland had everyone spread out. At the beginning, they had targeted some of the weaker areas and used their strongest forces to launch a surprise attack. Unfortunately, before they could even get close, the originally sparsely populated areas suddenly became heavily guarded, and the attackers ended up badly battered and bleeding. Under Han Shoror's orders, the mags had released magic in unclear directions. However, they were often able to beat Yolland's men into a sorry state, severely injuring or killing those who had wanted to take advantage of the situation to launch a sneak attack in the dark. I didn't see anyone release the sky's eye. I don't know how the enemy can grasp our movements so clearly. The wind mage appeared to be extremely anxious and frantic as he quickly said in a panicked voice. Everyone, if you think that you can easily escape after committing a crime in the Lancelot Empire, I think you are gravely mistaken. Heh, we all know who you are. As long as you put down your weapons, surrender, and reveal your identities to us, we can spare your lives and wait for the negotiators of your empire to come. Han Shoror gave out a series of orders and spoke with a smile. Through the observation of the yin demons, Han Shoror had a clear grasp of their movements. Then, he had arranged reasonable experts to intercept them according to their strength. He had successfully killed more than 20 assassins, and only 13 were left. Due to Han Shoror's reasonable commands, the Northern Guard only had 4 lightly injured and 1 heavily injured from the enemy's counterattack. Other than that, no one had died. However, what responded to Han Shoror was an even more fearless charge. Not a single one of these Angela Empire assassins showed the slightest hesitation. After Han Shoror's words, they fiercely tried to charge out of the encirclement. From their reactions and strength, Han Shoror could deduce that they were all death-sworn. They had probably never thought of living since they entered the Lancelot Empire. It was basically unrealistic to capture these kinds of people alive. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Han Shoror suddenly said, "Everyone, don't hold back. Kill them all. Brothers, do your best to charge out. Even if you can't, at least drag a few down with you." Yolland suddenly shouted when he heard Han Shoror's merciless command. "You have no chance." Emily's voice was cold. Her eyes under the black robe stared at Yolland and said, "There were more than 10 technicians in the factory. They were all powerless civilians. They were all brutally killed. You all deserve to die today. Haha, you're not from our empire. If you die, then so be it." Yolland laughed wildly. He raised his double-edged broadsword and charged straight at Emily while riding on the tattoo beast he was riding. He laughed wildly and said, "Woman, do you dare to stop me alone? You're courting death." Before Emily could chant an incantation, Han Shoror arrived at lightning speed. A thick killing intent spread out in an instant. The Demon Slayer edge radiated red light in all directions. The blood-red sword aura swallowed and spat. Han Shoror gripped the Demon Slayer edge and slashed it down at Yolland from above. Yolland, who'd been charging towards Emily, hadn't thought that Han Shoror would fly over and attack from above. Although he had the strength of a Sky Knight, It was still a bit strenuous for him to face such a sudden attack. He'd been holding his broadsword horizontally, but now he hurriedly raised it to meet the demon slayer edge above his head. Clang! Sparks flew in all directions, and an obvious crack appeared on Yoland's broadsword. His shoulder trembled, and he groaned. The violent pattern beast beneath him couldn't withstand the gravity, and its 4 short legs broke with a creak sound. The violent pattern beast fell to the ground, and its wolf-like head continuously spat out blood. "Ha, even if you kill me, don't even think about getting the blueprints. All the technicians have been killed. Without the blueprints, you still won't be able to make the chariot." Yoland first looked at the tattoo beast beneath him with grief, then laughed wildly with a malevolent expression. He had no way to attack Hanshoro, who was standing proudly in the air and could only quickly run towards Emily. "Isn't it just hiding in a crack in the wall? How hard can it be to find?" Hanshoro said disdainfully. When Yoland's face changed greatly, Hanshoro didn't bother with Yoland and rushed towards the room they'd been hiding in like lightning. Chapter 284. Yoland, who had planned to attack Emily, felt his heart skip a beat when he heard that Hanshoro had revealed his secret. Just as he was about to turn around and return to the room to destroy the blueprint, a few crossbow bolts whizzed towards Yoland. Emily waved the magic staff in her hand, and a sharp Grim Reaper scythe, shining with the light of death, slashed towards Yoland's body. "Stop him. Don't let him get the blueprint." Yoland's sharp voice rang out as he hurriedly raised his broadsword and slammed it towards the Grim Reaper scythe. The Angela Empire assassins who had been trying to break out of the encirclement all gave up on trying to break out of the encirclement when they heard Yoland's shout. They all turned around and charged towards Hanshoro. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between them and Hanshoro was too great. Their speed was also incomparable. Hanshoro used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to fly to the room like a bolt of lightning. He took out the blueprint from the hollowed-out corner of the wall, and only then did the assassins run in front of him. "Courting death," Hanshoro shouted coldly. He lifted the demon slayer edge and landed on the ground, walking towards the Angela Empire assassins who were charging towards him in a frenzy. As the mystical glacial spellfire was unleashed, Hanshoro's demon slayer edge burst out with a brilliant purple and red light. The purple and red light sparkled like a rainbow on the blade of the demon slayer edge, quickly forming thin and long flames. The purple and red flames flickered beautifully, jumping out of the demon slayer edge's blade and stretching into twisted lines of fire, entangling into 2 magic webs, one purple and one red. The few assassins from the Angela Empire who were charging towards Hanshoro only had one thought in their minds: to destroy Hanshoro. Facing the magic webs of the scorching and freezing elements, each of them unleashed their strongest fighting chi to form swords, attempting to tear the 2 webs apart. However, Hanshoro's strength had greatly improved, and his mastery of the mystical glacial spellfire had reached a whole new level. The leaping magic webs twisted and swayed in the air, as if they were fishing in the ocean. The sword light pierced the magic webs, but they simply hit nothing but air, piercing through the beautiful lines of fire. "Not good, retreat quickly." Yoland, who had dodged the death god's scythe in the distance, charged towards Hanshoro as well. When he saw that his subordinate's sword rays were ineffective against the weave, he immediately understood that this unknown web was not something that could be torn apart by sword rays. Thus, he could not help but shout a warning. However, the strange swaying webs in the air were extremely fast. Before those people could react, 2 large webs had already been cast down and trapped them all. The crimson net enveloped the 3 assassins. The bodies of the 3 assassins that were touched by the line of fire felt as if they were pressed down by a red-hot iron brand. Thick smoke suddenly rose from their bodies. Amidst the shrill screams, their flesh was charred black, and they slowly fell to the ground. The other 4 assassins who were covered by the purple weave immediately froze up, their bodies shivering like ice sculptures as they maintained their positions of either dodging or attacking. "I'll die with you." Yoland finally arrived in front of Hanshoro. When he saw his brothers turn into charred ice sculptures under the cover of the weave, he roared and raised his broadsword, charging towards Hanshoro without a care for his own safety. "Heh. I'm afraid you won't have the chance." Hanshoro raised the demon slayer edge, a calm smile on his face as he said these words, and flew towards Yoland. Yolland had a sinister expression on his face as he brandished his great sword. He laughed wildly when he saw Hanshoro rapidly approaching, and was about to throw caution to the wind and fight to the death with Hanshoro when a pair of hands suddenly reached out from the ground beneath his feet and tightly grabbed onto his feet. "Shoot him to death!" Hanshoro, who had been close to Yolland, suddenly froze in midair as he shouted at the dozen or so Northern Army knights with crossbows in their hands. Yolland, who was unable to move, could only watch as Hanshoro stood 5 meters in front of him in the air. When he raised his broadsword and chopped down at the 2 large hands that were grabbing onto his legs, the 2 large hands retracted into the ground. He then felt an unforgettable pain from the bottom of his feet. 2 bone spikes had pierced deep into his feet, sinking deep into his knees. Amidst the screams of a pig being slaughtered, several crossbow bolts flew over and pierced through Yolland's body. Yolland's resentment and killing intent before his death transformed into an aura that was difficult to see with the naked eye and was absorbed by Hanshoro, who stood calmly in front of him. Including Yolland, the group of 20 or so assassins from the Angela Empire had all lost their lives. None of the resentment and killing intent of the dead escaped Hanshoro's absorption. Instead, it made Hanshoro's magical yuan even more complete, and the feeling that he was about to break through became stronger and stronger. Hanshoro walked in front of the 4 Angela assassins who were like ice sculptures and shot out 4 beams of black light that landed on the 4 assassins. 4 crunching sounds rang out one after another, and the originally frozen assassins fell limply to the ground. Hanshoro said to the knight leader of the Northern Army, "These 4 aren't dead yet. Guard them closely and don't let them commit suicide. This will be an explanation to His Majesty. Don't worry, Sir Brian, we know what to do." The leader readily agreed and ordered the few soldiers behind him, "You guys, tie up these 4 assassins and cover their mouths with cloth. Don't let them have the chance to bite their tongues and commit suicide." Under the leader's orders, the dozen or so soldiers quickly came over and took out special tools to tie people up from their leather bags. From their well-practiced movements and rich equipment, Hanshoro was sure that these 4 assassins would have a hard time even if they wanted to commit suicide. Once they were brought to the Northern Army's detention center and given an anesthetic, they would be so weak that they wouldn't even have the strength to bite their tongues. Under torture, they might actually be able to get some information out of them. Without looking at the 4 assassins, Hanshoro walked to Emily's side and handed the blueprint to Emily. "Take it. This mission is considered complete. It doesn't matter if I give the blueprint to the Northern Army. If you take the blueprint, the Northern Army will be able to answer to His Majesty." Emily and Hanshoro naturally wouldn't stand on ceremony. Since Emily couldn't reveal her identity, she didn't say anything to Hanshoro. She nodded and turned around, landing on the carriage that Chester was driving. She entered the carriage and left with Chester, quickly disappearing. "Sir Brian, it's all thanks to you that we were able to successfully capture the assassins from the Angela Empire and find their hidden blueprint. If Count Boris puts in a few good words for you in front of His Majesty, Sir Brian's contribution will be enough for you to be made a noble." Thunder Archmage Kyria walked in front of Hanshoro and sincerely congratulated him. He appeared to be even happier than Hanshoro. "Heh, the credit belongs to everyone. Without everyone's cooperation, I wouldn't have been able to capture them by myself. You guys go back and report. I still have some matters to attend to, so I'll be leaving for a while." Hanshoro glanced at Kyria and said with a smile, "All right, Sir Brian, please leave first. We'll take care of the aftermath," Kyria said with a respectful expression. Nodding, Hanshoro didn't continue to stay here. He left in another direction and quickly disappeared from the dirty and chaotic slums of the western part of the city. In the dead of night, Hanshoro silently appeared in the Boot Merchant Guild and walked towards Phoebe's room with great familiarity. "There's no need to think about it. I believe that Brian will definitely win. Perhaps our guild's crisis can be turned around with this gamble. Take out all the funds we can and fiercely fight against Cameron and the others." In Phoebe's living room, the capable and astute Phoebe said resolutely, "Little Phoebe, do you want to reconsider this matter? I know your relationship with Brian. Although his strength isn't bad, Leah Kane has been famous for many years and is even stronger. Everyone agrees that Leah Kane has a higher chance of winning. This gamble is no small matter. If we lose, I'm afraid that the Boot Merchant Guild will directly collapse. Boot Merchant Guild's elder Andrew said with some worry as he leaned on his walking stick. Andrew was an elder of the Boot Merchant Guild. Before Phoebe had taken control, he had taken care of Phoebe. Therefore, Phoebe still cared a lot about Andrew's opinion. However, after becoming the master of the Boot Merchant Guild, Phoebe had truly taken control of the guild. During this period of time, the Boot Merchant Guild had indeed made great progress in Phoebe's hands. Andrew had also seen this and understood that Phoebe wasn't an emotional person. If it wasn't for Leah Kane's fame, perhaps he wouldn't be so worried. Grandpa Andrew, Brian's strength is even more powerful than you can imagine. In addition, we've already been forced into such a state by Cameron. Right now, Cameron's Merchant Guild is doing everything they can to suppress us. Our guild is having a hard time moving forward. Even without this competition, our Boot Merchant Guild will still be slowly weakened by their bullying. But if we win this time, then we can reverse the situation. Those merchant guilds that originally cooperated with Cameron will shed all pretenses of cordiality because of the huge losses. At that time, we, who have a large amount of capital, will be able to truly control the situation. Phoebe calmly analyzed and explained to Andrew. Ari, since you've said so, then let's do it. I hope that Brian won't disappoint us, otherwise the Boot Merchant Guild will really be finished. Andrew thought for a while and finally nodded in agreement with Phoebe's suggestion. This also meant that the crisis that the Boot Merchant Guild was facing was extremely great. Otherwise, they wouldn't have taken this kind of gamble to save the guild. Chapter 285. After Andrew's group left, Phoebe sat there with a frown on her face, deep in thought. It seemed that the Boot Merchant Guild was facing a great crisis this time. Otherwise, with Phoebe's cautious nature, she probably wouldn't have used this kind of gambling method to fight. Han Shoror slowly walked in without a sound and looked at Phoebe with bright eyes when he arrived at the door. After a while, Phoebe was suddenly startled. She raised her head and saw that the person was Han Shoror. She revealed a serene smile and happily said, "You're back? Don't worry, I will kill Leah Kane with my sword tomorrow. There's no doubt about that." Han Shoror smiled as he walked towards Phoebe. When he was in front of Phoebe, he reached out and smoothed out the worry lines between Phoebe's eyebrows. He said softly, "I believe you. This time, our Boot Merchant Guild has put out 700,000 gold coins. As long as you kill Leah Kane, Cameron will have to compensate us 5 times the amount according to the current odds. No matter how rich Cameron is, he won't be able to support it. This way, our Boot Merchant Guild will have an enormous amount of capital. Cameron and the others will naturally not be in danger." Phoebe enjoyed Han Shoror's gentleness very much. She lightly leaned on Han Shoror's chest and said softly, "All right, you should rest early. I'll cultivate here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll go to the garden house to challenge Leah Kane and get rid of this trouble as soon as possible." Han Shoror patted Phoebe's fragrant shoulder and urged Phoebe. After hearing Han Shoror's words, Phoebe nodded meekly and smiled. "Don't worry, I'll definitely go with you tomorrow and watch you kill Leah Kane with my own eyes. I know you'll definitely win." After saying this, Phoebe didn't stay here any longer. She walked into the room with a light smile and said softly, "Wait until you win, then accompany me for a good chat." After Phoebe left, Han Shoror sat down cross-legged in the hall and silently circulated his magical yuan. He slowly recovered his spirit and adjusted his condition. Inside Han Shoror's body, the demon infant seemed to be in a bloody whirlpool. Drops of blood essence were sparkling and translucent like rubies, appearing like red crystals. The blood essence converged into a whirlpool, nourishing the demon infant in the center. Streaks of crimson blood energy surrounded it. This was the killing intent of the bloodlust realm. It was also a kind of nourishment for the demon infant. The demon infant that looked exactly like Han Shoror was only the size of a fist, but there was a black dot between its eyebrows. This was where Han Shoror's life weapon, the Demon Slayer Edge, resided. The Demon Slayer Edge that was connected to Han Shoror's life had absorbed a large amount of killing intent during this period of time. It had hidden itself in Han Shoror's body and became a black dot between the demon infant's eyebrows. Through this method, the connection between Han Shoror and the Demon Slayer Edge became more complete. The Demon Infant and the Demon Slayer Edge could also replenish and absorb energy from each other. Once the Demon Slayer Edge successfully evolved into a vile soul, the connection between the Demon Slayer Edge and the Demon Slayer Edge would become even closer. As long as Han Shoror willed it, it wouldn't be impossible for him to take someone's head from 1,000 miles away. During this period of time, the Bloodlust realm Han Shoror had fought all over the place and killed many experts. The killing intent and resentment of the experts that died in Han Shoror's hands were all absorbed by Han Shoror, aiding Han Shoror's progress bit by bit. Especially during the trip to the Forbidden Land, where Han Shoror had devoured a large amount of killing intent, both Han Shoror and the Demon Slayer Edge had made great progress. In the Bloodlust realm, Han Shoror could already gradually control his nature. When the killing intent accumulated to a certain degree, it would change from quantitative to qualitative. At that time, he would be able to break through to the separate demon realm, and his strength would increase by another step. At that time, not only could he continue to cultivate a higher level of secret demonic arts, but he could also separate his consciousness from his body and obtain some unfathomable abilities. After a night of meditation, Han Shoror was in high spirits the next day. He left the Boot Merchant Guild with Phoebe and headed to the garden house where Leah Kane lived. During these days, the news that Han Shoror was about to challenge the mad great swordmaster Leah Kane of the Brut Merchant Alliance had been deliberately exaggerated by Candide and Lawrence. Many spies of the nobles appeared in the vicinity of the garden house. There were also a few experts from all sides who were full of interest, waiting for Han Shoror's arrival. When Han Shoror alighted from Phoebe's carriage and walked alone to the garden house, he was recognized by someone. Amidst the whispers, the spies from all sides quickly returned to report the news. For a moment, the whispers turned into a hubbub. More and more people came to the garden house after hearing the news. As the mad great swordmaster of the Brut Merchant Alliance, Leah Kane was very famous in the circles of many nobles and experts. As soon as such a character appeared in Ossen City, he successfully defeated 3 of the city's great swordmasters and made a name for himself. Unfortunately, Leah Kane was an outsider after all. The citizens of the Lancelot Empire naturally didn't like this. During this time, Han Shoror's fame had also risen greatly. Of course, Han Shoror's reputation wasn't good either. Since he had killed several opponents in a row, Han Shoror's notoriety had spread far and wide. However, although Han Shoror's reputation wasn't good, he was still a citizen of the Lancelot Empire. Therefore, everyone hoped that he would win. Along the way to the garden house, the nobles and commoners in the surroundings all cheered to send him off. These people had long known that such a day would come. Due to Lawrence's information, they knew that Han Shoror would definitely come within the next 2 days. Since they had nothing better to do, they came to try their luck. They didn't expect that Han Shoror would really come today. The spectators were all in high spirits. Han Shoror, who was 1.9 meters tall, wore a simple and capable black warrior's attire. His appearance was masculine and handsome. Because he had been practicing demonic arts for a long time, he naturally had an eye-catching demonic temperament. Some of the noble ladies who saw Han Shoror for the first time had a favorable impression of him as soon as they saw his appearance, regardless of whether they were right or wrong. Each and every one of them looked at Han Shoror with burning gazes. At first, they whispered to each other, but later, they even started screaming. "H, I'm so angry. He left for so many days, and this time he stood me up again. If I didn't know about this matter, who knows when I would be able to see him again." On a street in front of the garden house, Fanny was leading a group of people from the necromancy major of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. She stared at Han Shoror from afar and complained in a low voice. "Master Fanny, what are you saying? Look, that really is Brian. I thought it was fake when I first heard the news. I didn't think that it would really be Brian. He actually went to challenge that evil person, Leah Kane. Just thinking about it makes me excited." Amy of the necromancy major waved her little fist excitedly as she watched Han Shoror walk towards the garden house. She shouted at Fanny beside her. "No, nothing." Fanny covered it up with a smile. She then said, I didn't think that this guy wouldn't be nervous at all in front of so many people. It looks like he's really grown up. Brian is really amazing. His deeds have spread all over Ossen City. Even our necromancy major has many new students. These new students actually chose our weak necromancy major as soon as they entered the academy. What a reversal of fortune. Athena was also a bit excited. She sighed emotionally as she watched Han Shaw proudly walk forward. This time, Lisa had also come along. However, Lisa was much quieter than before. She didn't chatter incessantly, but only silently gazed at the dazzling Han Shaw in the distance. Looking at Han Shaw, who was still calm and unruffled in the face of so many gazes, Lisa suddenly felt that he was supposed to be this dazzling. "I'm Brian. I've come to see Mr. Leah Kane," Han Shaw said with a smile to the guard in front of the garden house's main entrance. A large number of nobles and commoners had come to watch from the alleys and pavilions around the garden house. The news that Han Shaw wanted to challenge Leah Kane had been released a long time ago. Leah Kane had also given the order, so the guard naturally knew what to do. "Mr. Leah Kane is currently cultivating. He already knew that you would come and told us to invite you in as soon as you arrived," the guard said respectfully. "That's good. Please lead the way," Han Shaw said with a smile. Under the guard's guidance, Han Shaw walked into the garden house with him. The onlookers outside were all stopped. The garden house was a private property after all. Without the owner's permission, no one could enter without permission. "Let us in, let us in. Yes, we've been waiting for a long time. Please let us in. I'm Count ACI of the Lancelot Empire. I want to see Mr. Leah Kane." After Han Shaw entered, some of the commoners and nobles surrounding the garden house tried to use various methods to enter. Not far away, a few carriages slowly approached. These carriages were beautifully decorated. One look and anyone could tell that they were nobles. A group of nobles led by eldest Prince Charles, Old Han, and Emily of the Betteridge family, ministers of finance Eve and Lawrence, Boris of the Northern Guard, and other nobles also slowly made their way over. Candide and one of the three heavyweights, Amy's, appeared on top of the tallest building across from the garden house. They were also watching the garden house across from them. Chapter 286. That kid, is he the Brian you were talking about? Amy's, one of the three heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, looked at Han Shaw from the garden house with interest and spoke elegantly. "That's him. He has indeed done many great things recently, and his strength seems to be unfathomable. It's just that I haven't truly seen him yet. This is a good opportunity to see his true strength," Candide said to Amy's with a gloomy face. Amy's looked to be in his 30s and was wearing a well-tailored white robe. There were no decorations on the robe, making it look clean and simple. It complemented his extraordinary handsome appearance and gave him an attractive and refined charm. However, for the nobles of the Lancelot Empire, the handsome and elegant Amy's, who often wore a faint smile, was a terrifying character like the god of death. Once a noble was targeted by Amy's, there was basically no possibility of escape. The lightest punishment was confiscation of their property and imprisonment, while the heaviest punishment was immediate execution. Among the three heavyweights, Cecilia was usually active abroad, Candide was in charge of gathering intelligence and investigating assassins of the Empire, and Amy's was in charge of monitoring and suppressing high officials and nobles. The three of them had a clear division of labor and coordinated very well. However, Candide and Cecilia usually didn't show themselves in front of the public and posed no threat to some of the nobles of the Empire. Only Amy's was the most familiar and also the most feared. There wasn't a single noble who wasn't afraid of him. You should be very clear about Leah Kane's strength. In addition, Leah Kane is related to first Prince Charles. If this kid can't beat Leah Kane, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to leave the garden house alive. Amy's narrowed his slender eyes and looked at Han Shaw, who was standing proudly in the garden house as he spoke to Candide. Heh, that's hard to say. Ferguson, who is a light Grand Magus like you, also died in his hands. As far as I know, Ferguson's fame isn't any lower than Leah Kane's. If he can kill a light Grand Magus, then he might be able to kill Leah Kane as well. Although Candide wasn't optimistic about Han Shaw, Hanshaw had been promoted by him. Candide couldn't lose face in front of Amy's. Amy's smiled elegantly and didn't say much. He only nodded slightly and leisurely sat down on a stone bench on the high platform. He took out an exquisite tea set and began to drink by himself. Inside the garden house, Hanshaw was a bit worried. Through the 3 indements spying, Hanshaw discovered that Emily, Phoebe, and Fanny were all outside the garden house. Although the 3 women weren't in the same direction, Hanshaw knew that they would definitely come looking for him once he left the garden house. Hanshaw wasn't worried about Emily because she was open-minded when it came to relationships. Although she might have some grudges in her heart, at least she wouldn't fly into a rage. However, Phoebe and Fanny didn't know about Hanshaw's situation. Once the 2 women saw each other, a storm would be inevitable. While Hanshaw was still worrying about relationships, mad great swordsman Leah Kane walked out from the center of the garden house. Leah Kane carried a broadsword and walked out with a cold expression. His cruel eyes swept over Hanshaw and he snorted, "Brat, you're that Brian, right?" "That's me. I think you already know about the situation, so there's no need for us to talk nonsense. Let's fight on this spacious lawn and settle this storm, shall we?" As soon as Leah Kane walked out of the room, Hanshaw immediately cast aside his emotional worries and focused all of his attention on Leah Kane, replying leisurely, "All right, I'll teach you a good lesson." Leah Kane laughed sinisterly and then looked at the crowd outside the garden house. He suddenly said, "If you don't mind, can you let the people outside come in and watch the fight?" Frowning, Hanshaw thought for a moment and said, "I don't mind. It's just that there are too many people outside. If they all come in, I'm afraid it won't be appropriate. Then, there shouldn't be a problem if only the nobles are allowed in." Leah Kane had listened to Charles' instructions beforehand. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made this suggestion. Hanshaw was worried that if the 3 women gathered together and got too close to him, there would be a disturbance that he didn't want to see. That was why he was a bit apprehensive. When Leah Kane said this, Hanshaw remembered that Fanny and Phoebe didn't have noble titles. He nodded and said, "Then do as you wish." Seeing Hanshaw nod in agreement, Leah Kane waved his hand at the guard in the distance. The guard seemed to have known Leah Kane's intentions and shouted from outside, "Those with noble titles in the Lancelot Empire can come in and watch. Other commoners are not allowed inside." With this, the nobles who were loitering outside walked in arrogantly and gracefully. The commoners around them didn't say anything. On the profound continent, the nobles had certain privileges. Commoners were well aware of this and had long since gotten used to it. Therefore, they weren't surprised. One by one, the nobles entered the garden house with their attendants. Among them, Phoebe and Lawrence mixed together and also took the opportunity to enter the garden house. As soon as Phoebe entered the garden house, she suddenly felt someone spying on her. She turned her head and saw that it was an astonished Emily. Emily was wearing a long purple dress. Her delicate face was as white as jade. She was incomparably beautiful among old Hans' group. She carried an awe-inspiring and inviolable nobility. She didn't have any of the melancholy that a widow should have. She was unbelievably dazzling. Damn that Brian. This Emily must have also obtained a miraculous pill. Could he be related to Emily? With just a glance, Phoebe knew that it was the effect of the rebirth pill. Especially when Emily looked at Phoebe with a gaze full of astonishment. The 2 women immediately understood what was going on with just a glance. "Hey, Brian, you'll definitely win." Lawrence was very optimistic as he cheered for Hanshaw from afar. "Chumph, he wants to win with his abilities. Dream on." First Prince Charles said disdainfully from not too far away from Lawrence. The group of nobles following behind him immediately chimed in and started sucking up to the prince. Each and every one of them did their utmost to recite the reasons why Hanshaw would surely lose, wanting to win Charles' favor. There was a lawn the size of a football field in the center of the garden house. Hanshaw and Leah Kane were currently at the center of the lawn, surrounded by nobles of the Lancelot Empire. These nobles all had expert guards beside them. In addition, they were quite a distance away from Hanshaw and Leah Kane, so they weren't worried about their own safety. The grave and stern Leah Kane didn't pay too much attention to Han Shor. When he saw the nobles enter one after another, he cast his gaze at Charles. Charles, who was chatting cheerfully and wittily, saw Leah Kane look at him. He nodded slightly, indicating that Leah Kane could make his move. Leah Kane, who was carrying a broadsword, finally turned his gaze back to Han Shor. He said coldly, "Brat, are you ready to die?" Han Shor took a deep breath and expelled all distracting thoughts from his mind. Han Shor's face instantly became cold and merciless. His voice was also cold and arrogant. "Mr. Leah Kane, before the battle, I have to remind you that apart from martial arts, I'm also an archmage necromancer. I hope you'll be careful. H, you're just a useless archmage necromancer. You're wasting your energy on this kind of useless magic. I can already imagine how high your attainments in martial arts are. I really don't know what kind of trash that great swordmaster you killed was. He couldn't even win against a guy like you who didn't focus on martial arts. It seems that your Lancelot Empire really doesn't have any true expert." Leah Kane was incomparably arrogant. He had offended all the surrounding nobles with just this one sentence. Even the nobles who had bet on him to win all revealed angry expressions. "Idiot, even if you win, don't even think about establishing a foothold in the Lancelot Empire. No wonder you wanted to escape from the Brut Merchant Alliance. With this kind of temper, if you didn't have some strength, you would have been killed long ago." First Prince Charles looked at the arrogant Leah Kane and cursed in his heart. He had already made up his mind that even if Leah Kane killed Han Shor this time, he absolutely couldn't expose his relationship with Leah Kane. This was to avoid affecting the noble's opinion of him because of Leah Kane. "Mr. Leah Kane, I hope you won't disappoint me." With a thought, the Demon Slayer edge fell into Han Shor's right hand from his sleeve. The 2-foot-long Demon Slayer edge was as sharp as a needle. The blade was an abnormal dark brown color. It didn't look very conspicuous without magical yuan. "Kid, since you dared to come to my place, you should have already made preparations. Today, I'll let you know the strength of your seniors. Don't think that you're invincible just because you've won against a few pieces of trash." Leah Kane snorted coldly and pointed the broadsword in his hand at Han Shor, speaking arrogantly. Han Shor didn't respond to Leah Kane. With a callous expression, he raised the Demon Slayer edge and directly flew towards Leah Kane. His body drew several afterimages due to his high speed. He was so fast that it was hard to tell which was which. Chapter 287. Although Leah Kane's words were disdainful, when Han Shor actually made his move, he immediately focused all of his attention to deal with it. He raised the broadsword in his hand and snorted coldly. A silver sword curtain suddenly opened in front of him. Leah Kane had already advanced to the realm of Great Swordmaster many years ago. He had immersed himself in this realm for a long time, challenging many experts in the Brut Merchant Alliance and earning the title of Mad Great Swordmaster. If he hadn't offended the lightning sacred Magus Reynold dealer of the Brut Merchant Alliance, Leah Kane wouldn't have come to the Lancelot Empire. Great Swordmaster Leah Kane opened the silver sword curtain and completely enveloped the area in front of him. Han Shor, who was flying over, could feel the enormous sword aura contained within the sword curtain. The invincible Demon Slayer edge in his hand shot out a black light after injecting demonic yuan into it, directly piercing towards the silver sword curtain. When the Demon Slayer edge shot out this attack, the black light that burst out was dark and gloomy. It carried an astonishing killing intent as it suddenly bombarded the sword screen that Leah Kane had created. Only a few explosive sounds could be heard as the silver sword screen and the black light intertwined. The silver light and black light scattered like specks of starlight. "Oh!" Leah Kane exclaimed softly and abruptly took a step back. He looked at Han Shor in astonishment and said, "Good kid, your martial technique is indeed a bit strange. It's actually not fighting aura." The silver sword curtain disappeared into thin air under the black light of the Demon Slayer edge. However, when the silver sword curtain and the Demon Slayer edge collided, an enormous force flowed through the Demon Slayer edge and directly into Han Shor's arm. Han Shor's arm was shaken to the point of numbness. Han Shor didn't rush to attack again. He coldly stared at Leah Kane, not daring to relax at all. After this attack, Hanshoro already knew that Leah Kane was indeed much stronger than the great swordmaster he had killed last time. They were both great swordmasters, but Leah Kane had immersed himself in this realm for many years. His attainments were indeed extraordinary. This Brian does have some strength. On the balcony opposite the garden house, Amy's looked at Candide in astonishment and exclaimed softly. Candide's eyes sparkled as he looked at Brian with great interest. He replied, "This is also the first time I've seen him fight." He didn't have any fighting aura, but he was actually able to break through Leah Kane's sword curtain condensed from fighting aura. This is indeed strange. It looks like he's hiding a lot of secret. The nobles around the lawn cried out in surprise when they saw Hanshoro cut through Leah Kane's sword curtain with a single stroke. Lawrence, Phoebe, and the others revealed joyful expressions. This kid isn't bad. He saved us last time at Eve's house, so we owe him a favor. I hope he won't be harmed by Leah Kane. Old Han, who was beside Emily, chuckled as he looked at Hanshoro and spoke to Emily. Father, I think this Brian might be able to win, Emily said with a light smile. She understood that Hanshoro's strength wasn't just limited to this. Just Hanshoro's ability to fly was already a great advantage. This wasn't something Leah Kane could do. Haha, I hope so. Old Han laughed heartily. Leah Kane snorted coldly amidst the clamor of the crowd. You do have some strength, but it's a pity that you shouldn't have challenged me. As soon as he finished speaking, Leah Kane raised his broadsword and walked towards Hanshoro. His speed wasn't fast, and every step he took was very heavy. The two crisscrossing scars on his neck looked very sinister, and his eyes were filled with a crazy desire to fight. Leah Kane walked over step by step, his aura becoming stronger and stronger. The broadsword in his hand shone with a brilliant silver light, emitting a dazzling radiance under the sunlight. The silver fighting aura and the broadsword fused together and converged into a gorgeous rainbow. It slashed down towards Hanshoro from a distance of 10 meters. This silver rainbow was incomparably fast, as if it had crossed 10 meters. It appeared in front of Hanshoro in an instant. The enormous power contained within it was so strong that even some of the spectating nobles could clearly feel it. Hanshoro stood there like a fool. He didn't seem to be able to react for a moment under the attack of the silver rainbow. The crowd watched helplessly as Hanshoro was slashed down by the silver rainbow. He didn't seem to know how to dodge at all. Hurry and run! Many of the spectators who were worried about Hanshoro all screamed out to warn him. Unfortunately, the speed of their voices was obviously slower than Leah Kane's silver rainbow. As soon as these people's warnings came out, a terrifying explosion came from the area where Hanshoro had been standing. The area where Hanshoro had been standing had directly split open into a 15-meter-long ravine. The ravine was so deep that it looked like it had been cut into a piece of tofu. Silver fighting aura lingered in the ravine and didn't dissipate. The enormous power continued to explode on both sides of the huge ravine, producing rumbling sounds. When the terrifying explosions stopped, the ravine that had been split open became even bigger. All the weeds were covered by the silver fighting aura and turned into green sawdust. What a terrifying attack. Poor challenger, he's definitely done for. Sigh, he's still a bit young after all. It's inevitable that he can't withstand a single blow from such an expert who's been famous for so many years. Let's go. That young man must have died in the ravine. There's nothing left to see. Oh, such a handsome man was actually killed by that ugly monster. Damn enemy nations people. All sorts of unfavorable comments about Hanshoro came from the mouths of the spectators. They watched as Hanshoro didn't make any movements to dodge Leah Kane's sword. They naturally assumed that Hanshoro had already died in the ravine. Suddenly, a loud shout sounded, "Oh my God, look up in the sky." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone raised their heads in unison. They saw Hanshoro proudly standing high in the sky with the Demon Slayer edge in hand, coldly looking down at Leah Kane. He wasn't injured at all. How is this possible? Even Leah Kane himself couldn't help but cry out in surprise. He stared at the sky with some disbelief. If a swordsman wanted to stand in the sky, they had to reach the realm of Sword God in order to rely on fighting aura to travel in the sky. Although Mags could use the levitation spell to stand in the air at the Archmage realm, the levitation spell still couldn't be that fast, nor could it be that nimble. Although Han-Shuror was an Archmage necromancer, he couldn't use the slow levitation spell to dodge the swift and violent sword attack. Therefore, Leah Kane couldn't help but be shocked when he saw Han-Shuror standing unscathed in the sky. Amy's, can you sense the gathering of magical elements on his body? Why can't I sense it at all? Candide, who was on the high platform, looked at Han-Shuror who was standing proudly in the sky and shouted in amazement. Shaking his head, the usually calm and collected Amy's also cried out in surprise, strange, very strange. He's not using any magical fighting aura, but is actually able to stand so miraculously in the sky. What's going on? It looks like it must have something to do with the miraculous martial arts technique he practices. Amy's, Brian's martial arts technique is very miraculous. If the Lancelot Empire's military can master it and use it to fly at high speeds, the strength of our Lancelot Empire's army will increase many times over. Candide's heart was moved as he immediately shouted, "Be careful. If Leah Kane dares to kill, we must stop him even if it means breaking the rules. This Brian is indeed miraculous. He's too useful to our Lancelot Empire. We absolutely cannot let him die." Amy's shouted resolutely. He had already decided to protect Han-Shuror at all costs. "Let's do it. After this matter, I believe that your majesty will know what to do." Candide immediately agreed. His sinister eyes focused on Leah Kane's body. The dark element around his body intensified as he prepared to make a move at any time, regardless of his status. Amidst the lush foliage of a towering tree, the super assassin Bolans that Han-Shuror and Lawrence had previously met in the northern rose garden was crouching amidst the leaves and gazing at the sky. His eyes were wide open as he muttered to himself, "This is too miraculous. He's actually using a martial arts technique to stand proudly in the sky. This Brian seems to be hiding other secrets besides his extraordinary attainments in killing aura. Master really made the right choice to let me come this time. Kid, don't think that you're so great just because you're a mage. Come down if you have the guts." Leah Kane bellowed as he looked up at Han-Shuror in the sky. Although he was a great swordmaster, he still couldn't fly in the sky. Facing Han-Shuror, he could only stare at him helplessly. "As you wish." Han-Shuror let out a long laugh in the sky and flew down like a meteor. The Demon Slayer edge in his hand shot out a 2-meter-long purplish-red demonic light. A thick murderous aura spread in all directions with Han-Shuror as the center. All the onlookers felt their hearts palpitate and couldn't help but step back a bit. Each and every one of them looked at the descending Han-Shuror with shock. Chapter 288. Good Kid. Leah Kane clearly felt this enormous killing intent. His crazed eyes were filled with battle excitement as silver fighting aura continuously condensed on the broadsword in his hand. He didn't wait for Han-Shuror to land on the ground before another silver rainbow shot out, aiming straight for Han-Shuror who was slashing at his head. Han-Shuror's eyes turned scarlet red as killing intent gathered around his body. His expression was sinister and terrifying, and a sinister, mysterious, and terrifying aura shrouded Leah Kane's head along with the bloody mist. The 2-meter-long purplish-red demonic light drifted downwards in a bewitching manner like a beautiful large feather drifting in the wind. A loud clang sounded as the purplish-red demonic light descended and intertwined with Leah Kane's silver rainbow. It was as if there were beautiful fireworks exploding in the air. Silver, deep red, and purple lights continuously shot out. Waves of metallic clashing sounds continuously came from the beautiful explosions. Leah Kane, who was standing on the ground, had already been smashed into the grass by the enormous force as the explosions continued to ring in his ears. The soil had sunk up to his knees, and a strange power of alternating heat and cold suddenly enveloped him. The strange power was like an all-pervasive ghost that poured straight into his body. Leah Kane suddenly shivered as he felt his body turn stiff and cold. Just as he was feeling aghast, another wave of scorching heat erupted from his body like a volcano. The two auras of cold and heat intertwined within his body, giving Leah Kane an incomparably wonderful and painful feeling. Leah Kane let out a crazed howl and screamed at the sky like a madman. He tore off the clothes on the upper half of his body, revealing a body of strong muscles. Streaks of silver light were clearly twisting on his naked body, and there were even streaks of red and purple light reflecting off of them. It was a very strange sight. "I'm going to tear you apart," Leah Kane roared. Specks of silver light gathered on the broadsword in his hand as he brandished it towards the cold attacking Han Shoror. Suddenly, the light on the broadsword in Leah Kane's hand abruptly receded. All of the silver fighting aura had disappeared, and the bright and clean broadsword didn't reflect any luster under the sunlight. It looked incomparably strange. Han Shoror, who had exchanged a blow with Leah Kane, understood that Leah Kane's strength was indeed extraordinary. Han Shoror, who was in the bloodthirsty realm, hadn't been able to gain the upper hand even with his full strength. If it wasn't for the mystical glacial spellfire's two extreme cold and heat attributes, Leah Kane wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation. Han Shoror's hands were numb as he flew down. An enormous amount of magical yuan surged into the Demon Slayer edge. Han Shoror, who had been accumulating energy to deal another heavy blow to Elijah Kane, suddenly discovered that the radiance of the broadsword had completely disappeared. He instinctively felt a sense of danger. Han Shoror's extraordinary perception once again displayed its keen effect. He was flying down to attack Leah Kane when he immediately connected with the three yin demons. When the broadsword in Leah Kane's hand trembled, Han Shoror's body suddenly split into four and fell in four different directions. At this moment, the broadsword that had completely lost its luster suddenly burst out with a blinding light. Fine, needle-like rays of cold light shot towards the sky like rain. Those needle-like rays of cold light covered an area of 5 meters. Not only were they densely packed, but they were also filled with terrifying penetrative power. They pierced into the sky in the blink of an eye and disappeared. The body formed by the yin demon took the place of the original body and was completely penetrated by the cold light. The incorporeal and formless yin demon was also invaded by a strange power when the cold light pierced through the sky. Because the dense fighting aura had been condensed to an extremely small degree, it actually possessed a powerful destructive power against the yin demon. This caused one of Han Shoror's yin demons to be pierced full of holes and its aura to become extremely weak. What a terrifying attack! Han Shoror was shocked. He was absolutely horrified when he landed on the ground. Leah Kane was indeed very frightening. He was actually able to condense fighting aura to such a small and dense degree. The fighting aura had been condensed to the size of needles, but the power and destructive power contained within had actually increased by 100 times. Even the almost incorporeal yin demon was injured by this kind of sharp light. Han Shoror believed that if he hadn't reacted in time and decisively used fulgurating shadows, his physical body would definitely have been destroyed. While Han Shoror was endlessly shocked by Leah Kane, as the attacker, was even more incredulous. He never thought that Han Shoror would be able to dodge his attack. When Han Shoror, who had been split into 4, landed on the ground, the 3 yin demons' bodies slowly faded, like reflections in water that had a stone thrown into them. They twisted and swayed for a moment before disappearing, leaving only Han Shoror standing behind Leah Kane. Too strong. Wow, what was that just now? A rain of swords, too gorgeous. I didn't think that this ugly guy could have such a beautiful attack. This Brian is the real deal. If my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, I would have seen 4 Brians just now. Oh my god, too amazing. You're not playing tricks on you. I also saw 4 Brians. What kind of martial technique is that? It's too powerful. After a moment of silence, the surroundings suddenly burst into a fierce clamor. All the nobles and their guards who had come to watch the fight started discussing in surprise. Their faces were filled with excitement and astonishment. They were shocked by this unprecedentedly exciting fight. What's going on? On the high platform, Candide had an expression of disbelief as he looked at Leah Kane and Han Shoror who were standing in the distance. That Leah Kane is really terrifying. According to our Dark Mantle's information, the experts he's fought in recent years have only used a silver rainbow-like sword light to directly defeat his opponents with his superior fighting aura. However, it seems like Leah Kane's true ultimate move should be that fine and dense rain of cold light that he just released. I could feel the terrifying attack power contained within. I didn't think that this Leah Kane, who looks so crude and brainless, would actually be hiding such a sinister and meticulous ultimate move. What a terrifying person, Amy's exclaimed. After a pause, Amy's excitedly shouted, "Candide, however, this Brian of yours is even more amazing. Facing that kind of attack that was almost impossible to dodge, he actually used that miraculous martial technique to split into 4 people and successfully escape. What an amazing kid. Of course, otherwise why would I put in so much effort for him?" Candide, who was originally secretly amazed, immediately said in a gloomy and proud voice after hearing Amy's words. The surrounding people were discussing spiritedly and clamoring noises rose and fell. It seemed like the excited spectators wouldn't stop until the two of them made their move. After experiencing a fierce battle, Leah Kane and Han Shoror both had a clear understanding of each other's strength. Han Shoror, who was originally full of confidence, began to treat Han Shoror seriously. Leah Kane, who was originally disdainful of Han Shoror, also put away his arrogance and treated Han Shoror as the most terrifying enemy in his life. At this moment, the two of them were 15 meters apart, facing each other with equal harshness. Leah Kane once again stood on flat ground, lightly panting as he glared at Han Shoror. The two of them just stared at each other without saying a word. After 10 breaths, Han Shoror grinned and said, "Leah Kane, you will die today without a doubt. Your attack just now was indeed incomparably powerful, but it's a pity that it requires a certain amount of time to condense and consumes a lot of fighting aura, right?" Leah Kane immediately turned pale with fright when he heard these words. It seemed that Han Shoror had clearly pointed out the weakness of that move. At this moment, Han Shoror dashed towards Leah Kane like a bolt of lightning. The Demon Slayer Edge was a step ahead of him and bit towards Leah Kane like a spirit snake with its fangs bared. Once Leah Kane's greatsword blocked the Demon Slayer Edge, the Demon Slayer Edge would change direction and continue attacking him from the other side. Han Shoror didn't attack Leah Kane like the Demon Slayer Edge did. Instead, he flew into the sky once again and took out a white bone staff unhurriedly, starting to chant a necromancy incantation. When the canopy of necromancy covered the sun, 2 evil knights led a group of dark creatures onto the lawn, surrounding Leah Kane heavily. 2 evil knights, 5 hate knights, 20 zombies, 70 skeletal warriors, and 2 teams of 30 gargoyles continuously appeared with Han Shoror's incantations. Leah Kane, who was entangled by the Demon Slayer Edge, couldn't do anything. He could only watch as the enormous dark creatures drowned him. "Leah Kane is finished," Amy said elegantly and smiled at Candide. "Let's go, we'll go see His Majesty together. This Brian's value will definitely make His Majesty make the right decision. Hehe, that kid Lawrence's luck isn't bad. Perhaps we should get closer to him." "You're right." Candide nodded in agreement and floated into the sky with Amy's, heading towards the palace from the other side. The two hadn't even completely left when Leah Kane's miserable howls rang out continuously and spread throughout the entire garden house. Leah Kane's ankle was grabbed by the Earth Elite zombie hidden in the ground. He was then ambushed by an unremarkable 7-winged little skull and was seriously injured. Afterwards, he was trampled to death by 2 evil knights charging towards him. Behind him, more than 100 dark creatures swarmed over and tore Leah Kane to pieces. Chapter 289. Leah Kane's fate was sealed the moment the 100 or so dark creatures appeared. After all, Leah Kane had already used up a lot of fighting aura in his battle with Han Shoror. That subtle cold light attack in particular had consumed a lot of fighting aura. Although Han Shoror, who had the mental strength of a Grand Magus, couldn't release Grand Magus necromancy magic, his enormous mental strength was enough for Han Shoror to summon a large number of dark creatures. Especially among these dark creatures, there were the ridiculously strong Little Skull, Earth Elite Zombie, and Wood Elite Zombie. These 3 strange dark creatures were mixed in with the enormous army of necromancers. Their surprise attacks weren't something an ordinary person could defend against. Leah Kane had to deal with the Demon Slayer Edge's all-pervasive attacks while facing the 2 evil knights who were famous for their tyrannical strength. Naturally, he had to divert most of his attention. In this way, The three strange creatures' special attack method was naturally effective. Leah Kane was instantly injured by Little Skull's sneak attack and then trampled to death by the evil knights. More than 100 dark creatures submerged Leah Kane in an instant. The surrounding nobles and attendants were blocked by the dark creatures and couldn't clearly see what was happening. They could only hear Leah Kane's mournful screams. When Leah Kane's mournful screams gradually subsided, Han-Shoror, who was standing proudly in the air, slowly chanted an incantation and sent all the summoned creatures back to the other dimension. When the dark creatures had dispersed, there wasn't even bone residue left in the center of the lawn, apart from blood. Everyone understood that Leah Kane was done for. He must have been torn apart and eaten by the dark creatures. The large amount of undried blood on the ground was proof of this fact. He's done for. Leah Kane is dead, he should be dead. Oh, how is this possible? He was killed so quickly. The onlookers looked at Han-Shoror, who was standing proudly in the air, and then looked at the bloodstains on the lawn. They all knew that the battle was over. Han-Shoror had successfully killed the mad great swordmaster of the Brut Merchant Alliance, Leah Kane. Han-Shoror had won this battle fair and square. He had displayed a miraculous martial skill from start to finish. In the end, he had used the most effective human wave tactic used by necromancers to drown a great swordmaster. This battle could be called a classic no matter how one looked at it. Especially Leah Kane's cold drizzle attack and Han-Shoror's miraculous martial skill of splitting himself into four. They were deeply imprinted in their memories. Amidst the hubbub of discussion below, Han-Shoror stood proudly in the air, whistling towards the sky as he soared into the distance. He elegantly and confidently disappeared into a black dot until no one could see a trace of him anymore. Not only did the onlookers in the garden house know of Han-Shoror's great victory, even the commoners on the streets around the garden house knew that Han-Shoror had won after seeing Han-Shoror fly away. They all cheered loudly, as if they were celebrating a festival. First Prince Charles's face was frighteningly gloomy. No matter how he guessed, he never thought that Leah Kane would lose. This was simply unrealistic for him. The great merchant Cameron's expression was even more unsightly than Charles. Standing behind Charles, Cameron's face was ashen. His gaze was lifeless as he stared blankly, completely at a loss as to what to do. As the operator behind the scenes of this wagered fight, Cameron had also bet his hard-earned capital. Just Fanny's Boot Merchant Guild alone would cost Cameron his hard-earned capital. In contrast to him was Phoebe. The originally cold and arrogant Phoebe's face was now filled with uncontrollable excitement. Her small cherry mouth couldn't help but mutter to herself, I'm rich, I'm rich. Heh, Brian, oh Brian, you really didn't disappoint me. Lawrence looked at Charles's gloomy expression and felt that he had never felt so carefree before. He laughed heartily and swaggered away from Charles and Cameron with Phoebe. Let's go, father. Although Emily already knew that this would happen, as the woman behind Han-Shoror, she still felt endlessly honored when she saw Han-Shoror display his invincible might. The corners of her mouth curved into a happy arc as she said to old Han with a smile. Inconceivable, an inconceivable kid, he. Old Han exclaimed in admiration as he walked out of the garden house with Emily. One by one, the officials and nobles walked out of the garden house. The details of Han-Shoror's great victory over Leah Kane were quickly spread. For a time, the entire Ossen city was talking about his elegant demeanor. Who knew how many noble ladies secretly regarded Han-Shoror as an object of admiration? Who knew how many nobles wanted to recruit Han-Shoror? Ossen city, inside the imperial palace. Ames and Candide, who had left earlier, were in the same room as His Majesty the King of Lancelot Empire. Candide and Ames were softly narrating the course of events to the king. After a long while, King Uhtred of Lancelot Empire suddenly shouted in a carefree manner, "Good, well done. I heard yesterday that he found the manufacturing blueprints. Today, he killed Leah Kane of the Brut Merchant Alliance. This kid is indeed worthy of my capital. Your Majesty, that's not all. Brian has grasped a mystical martial technique that is even more frightening. Not only can Brian become a top expert himself, if his martial technique can be popularized, it will have an immeasurable impact on the Lancelot Empire." Amy's immediately added with a serious expression after Uhtred finished speaking. Uhtred was shocked when he heard these words. He asked in astonishment, "What's going on?" "It's like this." Candide, one of the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, began to explain in detail to Uhtred with a gloomy face. He narrated the details of Han Shoror's defeat of Leah Kane in detail. Candide then added, "Your Majesty, Brian has a clean background and is loyal and devoted to the Lancelot Empire. For such a person, it is worth it no matter what price your Majesty has to pay." Being able to become the king of the Lancelot Empire, Uhtred's knowledge and experience were naturally extraordinary. After Candide finished narrating Han Shoror's miracles, Uhtred's eyes shone with brilliance. After a moment of silence, Uhtred instructed, "Candide, I bestow the title of Count to Brian, a mansion in the northern part of the city, 10,000 gold coins, and a direct promotion from Dark Moon Emissary to Dark Sun Emissary. He has the right to investigate any information about the Dark Mantle. In addition, you will personally find Brian and let him choose an empty territory. For the time being, don't ask him about the martial technique. We must first let him feel our sincerity. Your Majesty is wise. I believe that Brian will definitely be endlessly grateful." Candide flattered. "Yes, Candide. This Brian was single-handedly promoted by you. Your contributions are also not small. I bestow you a medal of bravery as a reward," Uhtred said to Candide with a faint smile. "Many thanks, Your Majesty. Your subject is endlessly grateful." Candide was overjoyed and immediately kowtowed in gratitude. The Lancelot Empire's Medal of Bravery had a special meaning. Only those who had made outstanding contributions to the Lancelot Empire could receive a Medal of Bravery. With this Medal of Bravery, it meant that Candide would enjoy the privileges of the Lancelot Empire for life. Even if the current king passed away, any prince who succeeded the throne could not use force against the Empire's meritorious subjects with the Medal of Bravery. In addition, the Medal of Bravery could be inherited. Even if Candide passed away, his immediate family members would similarly enjoy the privileges. Although the Medal of Bravery didn't have any real rights, this small medal was a proof of privilege. It was much more precious than an ordinary noble title. Therefore, even Candide was overjoyed when he heard that Uhtred had bestowed him the Medal of Bravery. He inwardly thought that this Brian was really his lucky star. "Congratulations, Candide." Amys, one of the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle, gracefully turned around and congratulated Candide. "Many thanks," Candide replied with a smile. His face was filled with unconcealable joy. "All right, this is what you deserve. Because of your discovery, the Lancelot Empire may obtain a Sacred Sword Master or Sacred Magus. I hope that you can better guide Brian and make even more contributions to the Lancelot Empire." Uhtred looked at Candide with a smile and slowly said, "Rest assured, Your Majesty, I will help Brian quickly adapt to the life of a noble in the Empire. This kid's perception is very high. Sooner or later, he will become a pillar of the Empire." Candide immediately guaranteed in his joy after receiving the Medal of Bravery. Nodding his head, Uhtred smiled and said, "All right, you guys can withdraw first. I will warn the Church of Light that they will not be allowed to act presumptuously in our Lancelot Empire. Hehe, I believe that the title of Count is only the beginning for that kid. I hope he won't disappoint me." Candide and Amys glanced at each other and didn't say anything else. They respectfully bowed and withdrew, directly returning to the Dark Mantle headquarters at Mount Orders behind the Imperial Palace through the secret tunnel. Candide would start preparing the matter of Han Shoror's noble title. Chapter 290. In just a few days, Han Shoror's name had spread throughout Ossen City. Due to Han Shoror's identity as an Archmage Necromancer, as well as his killing of Leah Kane, he had proven his strength. Uhtred used the excuse of him finding the blueprint to confer the title of Earl on Han Shoror. There was a magnificent mansion in the north of the city, with guards, maids, servants, and housekeepers. There were more than 100 rooms of various sizes. This was directly bestowed upon Han Shoror by Uhtred. Although the title of Earl hadn't been officially bestowed upon him, it still couldn't stop the admiration and deliberate befriending of Han Shoror. From the day Han Shoror left the garden house, this magnificent mansion had officially belonged to Han Shoror. In the past few days, many high officials and nobles came to visit. Unfortunately, the housekeeper kept saying that the master hadn't moved in yet, so all the visitors could only leave their gifts behind. Han Shoror, who was the center of attention, didn't know what was going on outside. After leaving the garden house, he flew alone to the mountain behind the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. He directly activated the transportation matrix at the entrance of the mountain and returned to the Cemetery of Death. After the battle with Leah Kane, Han Shoror felt that he had benefited greatly. He slowly comprehended what he had learned from the battle, slowly recovering his magical yuan and mental strength. After spending an entire night's time, Han Shoror's physical strength had reached its peak. He immersed himself in the bloodlust realm, his eyes bloodshot as he continuously circulated his magical yuan. Just like this, a few more days passed. Han Shoror's crimson eyes gradually returned to normal. He lightly sighed, "I'm only one step away. Unfortunately, this step is like a bottleneck. I can't break through. I really don't know what's going on." Han Shoror could faintly feel that he was about to break through to the bloodlust realm. Unfortunately, no matter how hard Han Shoror tried, he couldn't smoothly break through to this realm. Breaking through in demonic magic required opportunity and comprehension. Perhaps after 1 or 2 days of comprehension, Han Shoror would be able to directly break through to the next realm. Once he grasped this one step, he would be able to immediately advance. Blindly wasting his energy on cultivation wasn't a good idea. When Han Shoror felt that he couldn't rely on bitter cultivation to advance, he couldn't help but temporarily give up on practicing demonic magic. After thinking for a moment, Han Shoror took out the skeletal staff with 3 skulls of 3 different colors. Now, Han Shoror was certain that this skeletal staff was transformed from the Eye of Darkness. This was because the handle of the staff had the aura of the Eye of Darkness. When Han Shoror used the skeletal staff to gather mental strength to cast spells, he could successfully open the Cemetery of Death. Compared to the white bone staff he'd obtained from the Calamity Church, this skeletal staff appeared to be much more exquisite and ancient. The 3 different skulls seemed to contain 3 different kinds of power. When Han Shoror held the skeletal staff in his hand, he could faintly sense a little bit of it. Without a doubt, this skeletal staff was definitely a treasure that belonged to the Cemetery of Death. Holding the skeletal staff and shaking it, Han Shoror murmured, "Let's try this skeletal staff. Fallen undead warriors, answer the call of the Dark Emissary and reveal your existence." An ordinary skeletal summoning spell was chanted by Han Shoror as he waved the skeletal staff. His mental strength poured into the skeletal staff, and the 3 skulls on the staff suddenly lit up. Then, a row of 16 skeletal warriors appeared out of thin air. Han Shoror was greatly shocked as he looked at the 16 skeletal warriors that had appeared out of thin air. With Han Shoror's Grand Magus level mental strength, he could only summon 8 skeletal warriors when he used the white bone staff to summon skeletal warriors. However, when he used the bone staff, he'd actually reached the highest level of summoning skeletal warriors, level 5. The number of skeletal warriors had directly doubled. "This is too miraculous," Han Shoror couldn't help but exclaim. Then, he started chanting the Evil Knight summoning spell. When he finished chanting, 2 evil knights appeared out of thin air. Multiplied. Han Shoror was overjoyed. He then tried summoning the hate warriors and zombie warriors, but the results were the same. With the skeletal staff in hand, Han Shoror only needed to use the skeletal staff as a medium to chant spells, and the number of creatures he could summon doubled. After this experiment was successful, Han Shoror impatiently chanted another incantation, casting the canopy of necromancy and acid bog. In the end, Han Shoror discovered that both the canopy of necromancy and acid bog covered an area that was twice as wide as before. Good stuff. This really is good stuff. Caressing the skeletal staff, Han Shoror couldn't bear to part with it. He hadn't thought that this skeletal staff would be so miraculous. It could actually double the power of all necromancy magic, allowing Han Shoror's strength to increase once again. The skeletal staff had a peculiar appearance and seemed to be quite old. Apart from doubling the power of necromancy magic, Han Shor faintly felt that there were other secrets hidden within the skeletal staff. Unfortunately, apart from using the skeletal staff to cast necromancy magic, Han Shor couldn't find any other way to test it. A streak of white light flashed, and Emily's figure appeared in the transportation matrix at the center of the Cemetery of Death. Emily saw Han Shor as soon as she appeared, and immediately said, "I knew you should be here." The transportation matrix that connected to this place was in a crevice in the Cemetery of Death. Normally, Han Shor would travel to the Cemetery of Death from that secret location in the back mountains of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Only Emily knew about this habit. Therefore, when Emily arrived there and saw the magic wands neatly arranged in the corner of the cemetery, she knew that Han Shor was definitely in the Cemetery of Death. "Hey, why have you come?" Han Shor smiled when he saw Emily appear, and immediately pulled Emily into his arms. "You should hurry back to Osun City. His Majesty the King has prepared the title of Count for you. Everything has been taken care of, and we're just waiting for you to return to Osun City to be conferred the title of Count for you. Who knew that you would disappear for several days, and even the Dark Mantle couldn't find any news about you. Lord Candide is burning with anxiety, and asked me to help him find a way to contact you. I guessed that you should be in the Cemetery of Death, and it looks like I've found the right person." Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shor and explained. "So it's like that?" Han Shor responded, then chuckled and asked, "Then, His Majesty the King is preparing to confer the title of Count on me?" "That's right. Apart from the title of Count, there's also a mansion in the northern part of the city, and 1,000 gold coins. In addition, Candide seems to have even asked about the matters of your territory, and is just waiting for you to take it over," Emily said. "Very good. I didn't think that the battle with Leah Kane would give me such great benefits. Heh, it looks like the title of nobility isn't that hard to obtain after all," Han Shor said with a smile, then stood in the transportation matrix with Emily. They activated the transportation matrix and directly returned to Osun City. Mount Orders, Dark Mantle Headquarters. "Stinking brat, why did you disappear for 10 days? Candide immediately scolded when he saw Han Shor appear. "I suffered some minor injuries after the battle with Leah Kane. I had no choice but to hide and recuperate. That's why I was a bit late." Han Shor lied, then looked at Candide with a smile and congratulated him. "Congratulations, Lord Candide. I heard that His Majesty the King awarded you a Medal of Bravery 2 days ago." "Heh, congratulations." When Han Shor said this, Candide's gloomy face also revealed a bit of a smile. However, Candide quickly recovered and said with a straight face, All right, let's not talk about this for now. Give me your Dark Mantle Iron Medallion. His Majesty has directly ordered you to advance to the rank of a Dark Sun Emissary. Your luck is really too good. Let's go. Come with me to see His Majesty. Let His Majesty award you a noble title and bestow you with the territory you deserve." Candide said this and brought Han Shor directly to the Imperial Palace through the secret transportation matrix in the Dark Mantle headquarters. Not long after, King Uhtred summoned all the nobles of Osun City to see Han Shor in the vast Imperial Palace of the Lancelot Empire. Uhtred, who was sitting sideways on the throne, looked at Han Shor below and began to announce in a ceremonial manner, "Brian, for repeatedly helping the Lancelot Empire defend against foreign enemies. I bestow upon you the title of Count, a mansion in the northern part of the city, and 10,000 gold coins. I hope that you will continue to work hard and make even greater contributions to the Empire. Many thanks to your Majesty." Han Shor, who had long since been warned by Candide, sincerely expressed his thanks. "Yes, the easternmost Brettel city of the Empire will be your territory. This Brettel city occupies an enormous area, but it's also full of chaos. I hope that under your leadership, it will be restored to its rightful order." Uhtred raised his voice. When they heard that it was Brettel City, the nobles who were listening all revealed flabbergasted expressions, as if this Brettel City was very famous. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will definitely take a good look at Brettel City and restore it to the Empire's rightful order," Han Shor replied respectfully. "All right, that's all for today. Everyone is dismissed." Uhtred looked at Han Shoror a few more times, then waved his hand to indicate that the court meeting was over. Everyone left one after another. Chapter 291. Brettel City was located in the easternmost part of the Lancelot Empire. It was next to 7 duchies that were constantly at war. None of the 7 duchies were as strong as the Lancelot Empire and were constantly at war all year round. However, once the Lancelot Empire attempted to invade the 7 duchies, the originally warring duchies would immediately unite and resist the Lancelot Empire's invasion. Individually, the 7 duchies couldn't contend against the Lancelot Empire. However, once the 7 duchies united, their strength would surpass the Lancelot Empire. Fortunately, the 7 duchies couldn't unite. Otherwise, if the Lancelot Empire really faced an attack from the 7 duchies, it would truly be somewhat difficult. Brettel City was one of the cities of the Lancelot Empire that was locked in a stalemate with the 7 duchies. Brettel City occupied an extremely large area. Unfortunately, because it was located in such a remote area, it was also affected by the war between the 7 duchies. There were all kinds of people mixed in the city. Brian, under normal circumstances, it's impossible for a count like you to possess such a large territory. Brettel City's area is about the same size as Valin City. Normally, only those with the title of Marquis have the qualifications to enjoy such a city. Brettel City is indeed a bit chaotic, but it's just right for a spirited young man like you to manage. Once you manage Brettel City well, it will be of great benefit to your future prospects. If you want to obtain the title of Marquis or Duke, it will depend on whether you can grasp the opportunity. Candide, one of the 3 heavyweights, looked at Han Shoror and explained in a deep voice in a secret room. Han Shoror, who was sitting opposite Candide and flipping through the information on Brettel City, nodded when he heard Candide's words. He put down the information in his hands and raised his head, saying, Brettel City is barren. The land can't be used to grow any crops, and only produces some special iron and silver ores. The 7 duchies are at war with each other all year round. Bandits and thieves run amok there. Even some duchies' regular armies can disguise themselves as bandits and loot the towns around Brettel City. Such a chaotic place with such a valiant people is indeed an interesting place. So, what do you think? The current Han Shoror was already a count. After killing Leah Kane in the garden house, Han Shoror's strength had been fully proven. Even Candide no longer treated Han Shoror with the attitude of a superior talking to a subordinate. It was as if he was treating Han Shoror as an equal. I don't have any plans for now. Wait until I get to Brettel City and see the situation, Han Shoror replied indifferently. That's good. Keep these documents well. They will prove your status as a lord of Brettel City. The former lord of Brettel City has been deposed due to his incompetence. The city lord's mansion of Brettel City is now yours. You can take over everything with these documents. Also, Brettel City has Brettel, and Brettel City Army. Perhaps you aren't good at leading troops into battle, but I think Lawrence will communicate with you in this regard. You only need to protect Brettel City from being invaded by those duchies and bandits, and maintain order within the city. Candide said. All right, then I'll leave first. If there's anything, I'll contact you through the magic mirror at the Dark Mantle stronghold in Brettel City. Han Shoror nodded and said this to Candide before leaving the Dark Mantle headquarters. In a mansion in the north of the city, Han Shoror strode in. A butler was already waiting in front of the door. Upon seeing Han Shoror walk in, he immediately said respectfully, Honorable Count, you have finally returned. My name is Corliss, and I am the butler of your mansion. Hello, Corliss. Can you tell me more about the matters regarding the mansion? Han Shoror asked with a faint smile. Corliss was a white-haired old man. His clothes were not extravagant, but they were clean and tidy. His manner of speaking was refined and courteous. He should have been in this line of work for many years. After hearing Han Shoror's words, Corliss immediately said respectfully, Honorable Count, this mansion has belonged to you since you defeated Leah Kane. Everything is operating normally inside. In the past few days, a total of 35 Ossen city nobles have come to visit you. We have received a total of 73 gifts, all of which have been properly stored away. As Corliss spoke in a soft voice, Hanshuro noted down all sorts of information regarding the mansion. From Corliss, Hanshuro learned that many nobles' territories weren't in Ossen City. However, they would have a mansion in Ossen City that was usually used to stay when meeting with His Majesty the King. Of course, there were also some nobles whose territories weren't flourishing enough. They didn't like to live in their own territories, so there were many nobles who lived directly in Ossen City. In short, it was fine as long as they returned to their territories regularly to handle some matters and ensure that there wouldn't be any major disturbances within their territories. This mansion had been bestowed upon him by His Majesty the King. There were all sorts of maids, servants, and stewards within. Hanshuro had the right to dismiss them, and had to pay them a certain amount of salary every month in order for them to maintain the normal operations of the mansion. Corliss had described some miscellaneous matters in great detail. "All right, Mr. Corliss, I understand all of this. All right, bring me to the drawing room and invite Lawrence and Miss Phoebe over. I want to see the two of them. If anyone else asks, just tell them I'm not here." Through the Yin Demon's observation, Hanshuro had already discovered that there were many people who came to make friends with him in this mansion. These people were arranged in different rooms, so they couldn't know each other's movements. The Yin Demon that had been injured during the battle with Leah Kane had already recovered after being nourished by the blood essence in the Cemetery of Death. Although he had used up a few drops of blood essence, the Yin Demon was no longer in danger. "Yes, Lord Count." Corliss responded and brought Hanshuro into a spacious drawing room before respectfully withdrawing. This drawing room was as big as a basketball court. 7 bright lights hung from the ceiling, and the floor was covered with a soft carpet. There were many comfortable chairs placed around it, making it look very spacious and bright. After a while, Lawrence and Phoebe came over together. Lawrence laughed heartily and said to Hanshuro as soon as he entered, "Brian, congratulations. I heard that His Majesty the King was conferring a title on you today, so I found Phoebe and came over together. I thought that you would come back." After winning a large sum of gold coins, Phoebe appeared to be glowing. Her charming face was filled with a bright luster as she looked at Hanshuro with a fiery gaze and said, "Brian, Cameron is finished this time. The merchant alliance he formed suffered a huge loss because of him. His allies no longer trust him. The crisis facing our Boot Empire has been resolved." Seeing the two so happy, Hanshuro smiled and nodded, saying, "I plan to go to Brettel City. It's full of chaos and very interesting. If Brettel City can develop well in my hands, it will also be beneficial for you, Lawrence. I already knew that you would be in charge of Brettel City. Brettel City is indeed very chaotic. The personalities of the commoners are much tougher than those of Ossen City. The armies and bandits of the Grand Duchies would occasionally loot some of the surrounding villages. For so many years, the city lord of Brettel City has been powerless. This caused the merchants of Brettel City to leave the city one by one. The nobles and commoners have lost confidence in Brettel City. I reckon that it won't be easy for you to quickly take control of the situation once you arrive in Brettel City," Lawrence said with a frown when he heard Hanshuro mention Brettel City's matters. The Lancelot Empire had sent out armies many times in an attempt to invade the 7 Grand Duchies through Brettel City. However, they returned in defeat time and time again, causing the Lancelot Empire to finally give up on this idea. After the armies had retreated, the remaining tens of thousands of Brettel City's city guards couldn't contend against any of the duchies. It had become a habit for those duchies to take the opportunity to loot Brettel City. However, although the 7 Grand Duchies had the strength to occupy Brettel City, they didn't do so due to their mutual misgivings and fear of provoking the Lancelot Empire. They only looted Brettel City from time to time, but never truly occupied the city. Therefore, the city lord of Brettel City was very sullen. Brettel City itself wasn't as strong as any of the Grand Duchies. Brettel City's land was barren, but it wasn't small. However, there wasn't much profit to be reaped from it. His Majesty the Empire also wasn't willing to spend a huge amount of manpower and resources to garrison Brettel City to resist the 7 Grand Duchies. In this way, Brettel City had become a tasteless existence, but a pity to abandon. It would be a pity to abandon it, but there wouldn't be any profit to be made if they didn't abandon it. Therefore, it was very awkward. Don't worry, I know what kind of place Brettel City is. I have my own plans. In any case, His Majesty has given me full authority to manage Brettel City. I will take good care of Brettel City. Han Shaw chuckled evilly as he answered in a mysterious and unfathomable manner. What do you plan to do? Lawrence asked after a blank stare. You will know when the time comes. I will make Brettel City even more chaotic, Han Shaw said with an evil smile. Chapter 292. Senior Brother Lawrence, I have some things I want to discuss with Brian alone. Phoebe glanced at Lawrence and said softly. Lawrence stared blankly for a moment before coming to his senses. He chuckled and said, All right, don't worry Brian. Before you head to Brettel City, I will arrange for some generals who are good at fighting to go first. Nodding his head, Han Shaw smiled and said, Then many thanks. I really don't know much about some battle strategies. With the help of your people, I think they will definitely be of great help to me. All right, you guys chat, I'll be heading back first. After a while, I will personally go to Brettel City to visit you. Lawrence winked at Han Shaw and Phoebe, then walked out of the living room with a smile. After Lawrence left, Han Shaw immediately took a step forward and pulled Phoebe into his arms. After a series of lingering kisses, Han Shaw directly carried Phoebe and fiercely rushed into the bedroom. He forcefully flung Phoebe onto the spacious and soft bed, then Han Shaw pressed down on top of her. As their clothes flew off, the two naked bodies were entangled together. Phoebe's low moans were seductive as she desperately catered to Han Shaw's thrusts. They were entangled until there wasn't a trace of strength left in them. After the violent storm subsided, Phoebe lazily leaned on Han Shaw's wide chest. Her delicate fingers gently slid down Han Shaw's body as she murmured in satisfaction, I can't leave with you for the time being. Cameron's merchant union is facing the crisis of disintegration because of the huge losses from this bet. Our boot merchant guild has made a huge profit this time. It's a good opportunity to clean up the mess and make it difficult for Cameron to escape this time. You should first deal with the matters of your merchant guild. Brettel's place is very chaotic. Wait for me to stabilize the situation first. Han Shaw softly said as he gently caressed Phoebe's tender shoulders. Oh, right, there are some missing materials from last time. I've collected all of them for you during this period of time, so I'll give you these first. Phoebe suddenly remembered the list that Han Shaw had given her last time. There were still a few rare materials missing. She exclaimed softly. As soon as he said this, Han Shaw was pleasantly surprised and said, That's great. The place of extreme water was in the Valley of Sunshine. Now that all the materials had been gathered, Han Shaw could first plant the water elite zombie in the place of extreme water. After a while, he could directly harvest the earth elite zombie. Phoebe lazily rubbed her space ring and materials slowly appeared one by one. Han Shaw conveniently put them into his space ring. When all of this was done, Phoebe took out a crystal card and handed it to Han Shaw with a smile. I made a huge profit from this time's bet. There are 300,000 gold coins in this crystal card. You've just arrived in Brettel City, so you'll definitely need money. Take it first. So these 300,000 gold coins belong to you. I've also bet all the gold coins you've handed over to me before. You've made a huge profit, haven't you? The Boot Merchant Guild had taken out 700,000 gold coins to bet on Han Shaw and Leah Kane. According to the odds of 1 to 5, the Boot Merchant Guild had won 3,500,000 gold coins from this bet. 355,000 gold coins was definitely a huge sum. Most large families would only have this much wealth accumulated over hundreds of years. Even the Boot Merchant Guild itself was only worth around 1,500,000 gold coins before this bet. But because of this grand bet, the Boot Merchant Guild's wealth had doubled. This also meant that the Boot Merchant Guild had officially become a major financial magnate in the Lancelot Empire. 300,000 gold coins wasn't even a tenth of the bet's total, but it was a huge fortune for Han Shoror. Looking at Phoebe's charming face that was asking for a reward, Han Shoror was ecstatic as he slapped Phoebe's perky butt and said with a laugh, "Not bad, the gold coins in your hands are indeed in the right hand." "Of course," Phoebe said proudly. 300,000 gold coins in Han Shoror's hands was like a meat pie falling from the sky. In his joy, Han Shoror ignored Phoebe's pleas and directly hugged Phoebe, pounding into her until Phoebe didn't even have the strength to speak. The next day, the slowly awakened Phoebe left Han Shoror's mansion through the back door under Han Shoror's escort. After Phoebe left, Han Shoror returned to his bedroom and opened a cupboard. He used a key to fiddle around in the dark crevice, and a passageway automatically split open under the cupboard. Every noble's mansion usually had a secret room to store things or do some secret things that couldn't be known by others. This mansion bestowed by His Majesty was no exception. When Candide had met with Han Shoror at the Dark Mantle headquarters, he'd already told Han Shoror all the secrets of this mansion, including this underground secret room. Walking down the passageway, Han Shoror saw a large, empty room. Apart from a few empty cupboards, there was nothing else inside. Placing the magic wand in one of the cupboards, Han Shoror directly passed through the transportation matrix and arrived at the Cemetery of Death. The Cemetery of Death was gloomy all year round. Apart from the white bones that littered the ground, there were no signs of life or change. After leaving the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror let out a light breath and gazed into the depths of the dark forest, concentrating his senses. Why hasn't the fire elite zombie finished so late this time? Han Shoror frowned and muttered to himself in confusion. The Earth elite zombie and Wood elite zombie definitely hadn't been unearthed for as long as the fire elite zombie. If it wasn't for the fact that Han Shoror could sense the fire elite zombie's prolonged aura, Han Shoror really would have thought that something had happened to him. Could it be because of the fire attribute treasure, the fire lotus, or because the Lord of the Flames is there? Han Shoror pondered for a moment and guessed inwardly. Unlike the Earth elite zombie and Wood elite zombie, the place of extreme fire had nurtured the fire attribute treasure, the fire lotus. Chu Kanglin's memories didn't describe what would happen if that happened. In addition, there was a terrifying Lord of the Flames there. What was even more peculiar was that the Lord of the Flames seemed to have treated the fire elite zombie as his child. With so many strange things added together, the fire elite zombie must have been affected. Otherwise, the fire elite zombie wouldn't have taken so long to emerge. Forget it, I'll plant the water elite zombie for now. Han Shoror didn't think too much about it. Since he could still sense the fire elite zombie's aura, he knew that there shouldn't be any problems. Therefore, he decided to first go to the Valley of Sunshine and plant the water elite zombie in the place of extreme water. It didn't take long for Han Shoror to fly from the dark forest to the Valley of Sunshine's sphere of influence. Han Shoror first arrived at the Soul Destroyer mercenary group and landed on that strange cliff. Strangely, Han Shoror didn't sense the aura of Dark Dragon Gilbert. He only saw Grant when he entered the cliff. When Grant saw Han Shoror arrive, he immediately bowed respectfully and explained, "Leader and Gilbert took on a mission and aren't here for the time being." "What's the situation like now?" Han Shoror and the 3 Yin demons circled around and discovered that the number of mercenaries here had increased by 200. These 200 people were all unfamiliar faces. Therefore, he understood that the Soul Destroyer mercenary band was in the process of expanding. What else could it be? The major powers have gone from fighting in the dark to fighting openly. They've been fighting fiercely during this period of time. Lawton's Cairo mercenary band is the most powerful. The other 3 parties have no choice but to band together and fight against the Cairo mercenary band. A few bandit powers occasionally participate. In any case, the Valley of Sunshine is in a mess now. Grant smiled as he explained to Han Shoror. "Oh, right. After the previous incident, did the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the House of Menlo come looking for trouble with you?" Han Shoror recalled that he had killed Ferguson and heavily injured Adam Menlo. He couldn't help but ask in astonishment. "Heh, those 2 parties indeed hate our Soul Destroyer mercenary band. Unfortunately, they don't know where we are. Even if they want to take revenge, they don't know how." Grant seemed very pleased with himself as he laughed heartily. I see that there are many new faces in the mercenary band. Will there be any problems with these people? Han Shuor's heart moved as he asked. Don't worry. The mercenaries we've chosen have all gone through strict checks. Those who can enter this area are all trustworthy. Hehe, thanks to your help last time, Lawton has allowed us to recruit in the Valley of Sunshine. This has saved us a lot of effort. Grant looked gratefully at Han Shuor as he smiled. All right, since Trunks and the others aren't here, I'll be leaving first. After inquiring about the information he needed to know, Han Shuor bid farewell to Grant and flew directly to the Valley of Sunshine. The members of the glorious Tanai Cairo mercenary band had already gotten to know Han Shuor. When they saw that Han Shuor was entering the valley, they didn't have to go through any formalities and even smiled at Han Shuor. Their attitude towards Han Shuor was very friendly. After Han Shuor entered the Valley of Sunshine, he headed straight for the shop. When he arrived at the Merchant Union, he activated the Great Formation without another word and descended into the well. He took out the materials from his space ring and sank to the bottom of the well. He summoned Little Skull at the bone-chilling bottom of the well. According to Han Shuor's instructions, Little Skull summoned an ordinary-looking zombie with the next summoning spell. Then, the Little Skull disappeared and Han Shuor pressed the zombie warrior into the center of the place of extreme water. He threw in all the strange materials and gathered all the water element energy in the place of extreme water towards the zombie warrior. Chapter 293. With the experience of refining the earth, wood, and fire elite zombies, Han Shuor didn't spend too much effort on the water elite zombie. When Han Shuor had finished and leapt out of the well, Han Shuor suddenly sensed two unfamiliar presences. The Shura Soul Formation was still operating in the courtyard of the shop, and it was filled with a deathly aura. The Calamity Church's Dark Grand Magus Edwin and the female alchemist Belinda were pacing back and forth outside the formation, not daring to enter. They looked at the gloomy courtyard from the surrounding rooftops. The aura of death within the Shura Soul Formation was thick, and the two of them couldn't clearly see what Han Shuor was doing inside. Han Shuor could clearly see the two experts of the Calamity Church when he walked out of the well and raised his head. Edwin and Belinda obviously knew that great danger lay below. Therefore, although they looked at the changes below with astonishment, they didn't dare take the risk of entering the formation. They appeared to be quite cautious. Han Shuor knew that Edwin and Belinda had already understood the dangers of this place when the experts of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had ambushed this place last time. It was only natural that they didn't dare approach this time. Han Shuor walked to the eye of the formation and sent a beam of dark light into it. The originally howling wind and deathly aura of death dissipated in an instant and the formation returned to its normal state. Han Shuor sat down on the chair in the middle and looked lazily at Edwin on the rooftop. He said faintly, "Mr. Edwin, it seems that you're always this sneaky every time you come. Is this how your Calamity Church does things?" Although the strange changes in the courtyard had disappeared, Edwin and Belinda didn't dare walk down. They chuckled and said, "Sorry, let's chat up here for a while. Congratulations on killing Ferguson, but you've also angered the Church of Light. They'll pay any price to deal with you this time. Heh, our Calamity Church sincerely invites you to join us. As long as you're willing to join us, we'll pay any price." "Sorry, I'm not interested." Han Shuor had rejected them last time, and now Han Shuor was still rejecting them without any room for discussion. "All right then. Since you're not willing to join our Calamity Church, can we discuss our cooperation?" "Hehe, the Church of Light has already dispatched a small group of Temple Knights. Their goal should be to deal with you. Although there aren't many Temple Knights, they are all true experts. This is the Church of Light's sharp sword for eradicating heresy. They are on their way to Brettel City and are waiting for you. Even if you didn't come to the Valley of Sunshine this time, our people would have notified you when you arrived at Brettel City. I didn't think I'd be able to meet you here, so I'll tell you in advance. Let's see if there's any possibility of us cooperating." Edwin was very sincere, telling Han Shuor such an important piece of news first. Han Shuor couldn't help but frown when he heard Edwin's words. The headquarters of the Church of God of Light was located in the most powerful Odin Empire on the profound continent. There was also the Angela Empire between the Odin Empire and the Lancelot Empire. The Temple Knights had always protected the Church of God of Light. For them to dispatch a small group of Temple Knights just for Han Shoror, it seemed that the Church of Light had truly made up its mind. I won't be cooperating with you for the time being, but I might contact you if I need anything. Han Shoror thought for a moment and said to Edwin. Edwin immediately chuckled when he heard Han Shoror's words. Our Calamity Church and the Church of Light are mortal enemies on the profound continent. The enemies of the Church of Light are our friends. All right then, our Calamity Church might appear by your side when you run into trouble. We'll meet again then. Edwin and Belinda didn't linger after saying this. They looked at each other and cautiously left Han Shoror's roof, quickly disappearing from sight. Han Shoror immediately moved after Edwin and Belinda left. He released all 3 of his yin demons and had them follow behind Edwin and Belinda. He wanted to see why the 2 were staying in the Valley of Sunshine. Edwin and Belinda were extremely careful and made many turns along the way, on guard against enemies following them. However, their figures still couldn't hide under the surveillance of the 3 yin demons. In the end, Edwin and Belinda actually entered the headquarters of the Cairo mercenary band together. Because they were tailing them in secret this time, Han Shoror didn't openly enter the Cairo mercenary band. Instead, he hid in a place not far from Tanai and used the 3 yin demons to spy on Edwin's movements. Han Shoror had actually guessed that Edwin had hooked up with Lawton when Edwin and Belinda had snuck up on him. Otherwise, Edwin and Belinda wouldn't have been able to find him so quickly after Han Shoror had returned to the Valley of Sunshine for only a few hours. The Valley of Sunshine was the Cairo mercenary band's sphere of influence, and the Calamity Church's eyes weren't that wide. Mr. Edwin, you went to see Brian? Lawton immediately asked when Edwin arrived. Nodding, Edwin thanked him with a smile. Thank you for informing me, I just saw Brian. Oh right. How are the preparations coming along? The 300 death guards of the Calamity Church will arrive in the Valley of Sunshine in the next 2 days. Anyone can get the Mithril mine, but we can't let the Church of Light take it. Otherwise, if they make Mithril armor out of it and equip the Templars, it'll bring us great trouble in the future. Lawton's expression was cold as he said in a sinister voice, Don't worry, as soon as your death guards arrive, I'll immediately mobilize the Cairo mercenary band and flatten the powers around the Mithril mine. Humph, I almost died there last time. I won't be so careless this time. The 3 great powers will pay with blood this time. Heh, that's for the best. If the Church of Light wants the Mithril mine, then we'll make them pay with their lives. Edwin had a sinister smile on his face as he discussed the details of the operation with Lawton. Han Shoror listened for a while and memorized all the contents of their conversation. When Edwin and Belinda were about to leave, Han Shoror took the lead and silently left the Cairo mercenary band. After leaving the Cairo mercenary band, Han Shoror immediately left the Valley of Sunshine and returned to the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. He once again inquired about Trunks and the others' movements. From Grant, Han Shoror learned that Trunks and Gilbert would need some time before they could return. Han Shoror didn't stay in the Soul Destroyer mercenary band. He immediately flew back to the Cemetery of Death and returned to the secret room in his mansion. Not long after he walked out of the secret room, Steward Corliss respectfully said to Han Shoror, My Lord Count, there's a young lady called Fanny who wishes to see you. She says that as long as you mention her name, you'll definitely see her. Han Shoror blanked and suddenly remembered his promise to Fanny. When he'd left last time, Han Shoror had said that he'd look for her within a few days. Who knew that he'd become so busy that he'd forgotten about this? Now, Fanny had actually come looking for him. She's there, take me to her. Now that Han Shoror had his own mansion, if Fanny and Phoebe frequently came looking for him, the relationship between Han Shoror and them would be exposed sooner or later. Just thinking about this gave Han Shoror a headache. Seeing him so anxious, Steward Corliss was somewhat astonished. He immediately said respectfully, My Lord Count, please come with me. After a while, Corliss brought Han Shoror to the room where Fanny was. He pointed inside and said, Miss Fanny is inside. You can leave first. Don't let anyone come in. Hanshaw instructed. After Corliss left, Hanshaw braced himself and walked in. With a glance, he saw Fanny sitting in the center. This time, Fanny wasn't wearing a magic robe. Instead, she'd changed into a navy blue dress. When she saw Hanshaw walk in, she immediately snorted coldly and looked at Hanshaw with cold eyes. "My Lord Count, you finally have the time to come see us commoners? I'm sorry. Because of some matters, I was a bit late. It won't be like this in the future. Fanny, you must forgive me." Hanshaw smiled wryly. Apologizing as soon as he'd walked in meant that he was in the wrong. It was only natural that Fanny would be so angry. "This isn't the first time. It seems that you've never fulfilled your promises." Fanny's face was still expressionless as she looked coldly at Hanshaw. Smiling wryly at Fanny, Hanshaw raised his hand and said, "I was wrong. You can punish me however you want. All right then, I'll forgive you as long as you promise me that you'll be an honorary teacher of the necromancy major." Fanny thought for a moment and glared fiercely at Hanshaw before speaking. Being an honorary teacher of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force was only a title in name and didn't need to be bound by the rules of the academy. They might only occasionally give a few lectures and answer questions when invited by the academy. The various majors of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force competed with each other. Being able to find a few famed experts within the empire to be an honorary teacher was a measure of the strength of each major. "No problem." Hanshaw readily agreed. "You bastard, how could you kill that evil person Leah Kane? How did you become an archmage necromancer? Just how many other things have you lied to me about?" Fanny was delighted when she saw Hanshaw agree, but then a series of questions erupted. Chapter 294. Hanshaw had managed to make Fanny, who had come to denounce him, beam with joy in just half an hour. Under his gentle words, a faint smile appeared at the corner of Fanny's mouth as she left Hanshaw's mansion in satisfaction. Arriving at the Boot Merchant Guild at the fastest speed to find Phoebe, Hanshaw went straight to the point and requested, "I want explosives, the kind with the most destructive explosive power, enough to flatten a small mountain." "Heavens, what do you want?" As a normal woman, Phoebe didn't need to move her toes to know what Hanshaw wanted. Her pretty face was filled with shock when she heard that Hanshaw needed explosives so urgently, and the more explosive the better. "Don't ask so much, get it for me as soon as possible, don't let anyone know." Since Hanshaw had made up his mind, he wouldn't hesitate. Time waited for no man, naturally the sooner the better. Once a woman had a physical relationship with a man, even a cold and arrogant character like Phoebe would change for this man. Especially when Phoebe knew that Hanshaw was smart and wouldn't do something stupid that would result in his death. Therefore, although she had some doubts, she didn't insist on asking more when Hanshaw urged her again. She immediately nodded, "Give me some time, I'll try to gather it through other channels." "All right. I'll come back the day after tomorrow at the latest to get the explosives. Don't leave for the next 2 days." Hanshaw instructed and hurriedly left the Boot Merchant Guild. Hanshaw silently returned to the secret room in his mansion and used the transportation matrix to return to the Cemetery of Death. He used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to fly to the mountain valley where the mithril mine was located and summoned the Earth Elite Zombie to descend upon this plane. The 3 yin demons slowly floated out and flew into the valley. Faces after faces leapt into Hanshaw's mind. The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, the House of Menlo, and the Carter Orc Alliance had more than 1,000 people stationed near the valley. They had surrounded the entire valley. The mithril mine was still in operation. However, due to the steep and narrow terrain of the mine, mining the mithril was not an easy task, especially since the mithril ore was mixed in with the silver ore and often existed in the deepest part of the mine. Therefore, although the 3 forces worked overtime these days, the progress of the project was still not satisfactory. The 3 yin demons circled around every corner of the valley. The Earth Elite Zombie hid in the ground, shuttling back and forth like 2 Shingsuan. According to Hanshaw's mental control, he left many holes in the depths of the valley that couldn't be seen, just in case Phoebe hid her explosives. From Lawton and Edwin's conversation, Hanshaw knew that there would be a bloody battle in the valley. Most of the forces of the four great powers in the Valley of Sunshine would be involved in this battle, including Lawton's Cairo mercenary band, as well as the 10 or so small powers that Lawton had tied together with various benefits. Due to the existence of the Mithril mine, the other 3 powers had invested a large amount of troops here. Once the battle broke out, this valley would become the largest battlefield in the history of the Valley of Sunshine. What Han-Shoror needed to do was throw in enough explosives to destroy all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine in one fell swoop. This matter had to be done very carefully. Only the Earth Elite Zombies' miraculous ability to drill into the ground would be able to complete this mission without anyone noticing. At this time, Han-Shoror had released the 3 Yin demons. He hadn't discovered that Tanai had an Earth Mage, so he was even more daring to have the Earth Elite Zombie set up the traps. Even with the Earth Elite Zombie's miraculous ability, it still took a while to set up the tunnels in Tanai. During this time, Han-Shoror kept an eye on the experts stationed in Tanai through the Yin demons. He was deeply afraid that these people would sense the abnormalities in the ground and discover this time's setup. It was a good thing that everything went smoothly. When the Earth Elite Zombie finished setting up the tunnels, Han-Shoror immediately left the valley. He'd been studying the Archmage-level Soul Tremor spell in the Cemetery of Death, and he'd felt that this spell was incomparably cryptic and difficult to understand. Soul Tremor used one's own mental strength to directly attack the opponent's soul. In order to master this spell, one must first have a certain amount of research on the soul. In addition, one also needed to grasp the technique of mental strength attacks. Even Han-Shoror found it difficult to gather one mental strength into an attack. As he paced around the Cemetery of Death, Han-Shoror furrowed his brow as he thought about the method of mental strength attacks. When Han-Shoror concentrated his mental strength, he could clearly feel the formless mental strength. However, to turn it into a tangible attack, no matter how hard Han-Shoror tried, he couldn't do it. It's indeed a bit difficult, Han-Shoror muttered to himself. He couldn't help but concentrate his mental strength, trying to form it into a tangible attack. The consciousness is formless and formless, but has boundless uses. Its attacks are based on the heart, and the heart will move. Han-Shoror suddenly remembered a paragraph of a demonic mantra. This was a description of the consciousness in demonic magic. When demonic magic reached the next separate demonic realm, demonic practitioners would be able to clearly sense the consciousness. The consciousness was actually a process of strengthening the soul. When a demonic practitioner reached the separate demonic realm, their soul would transform into the consciousness. As long as the consciousness wasn't destroyed, the demonic practitioner would be able to obtain eternal life. The consciousness was a formless and formless existence. Once the soul transformed into the consciousness, it would have many wondrous uses. The simplest use was to use the consciousness to sense the changes in the surroundings. The clarity and range of the senses would vary according to the strength of the consciousness. When fighting with others, as long as the consciousness was strong enough, it could directly form all kinds of strange attacks on the enemy, such as illusions or physical attacks. It could also control the opponent's mind, turning them into a puppet, and other wondrous uses. The consciousness could also be used to attack the enemy's soul, but it was much more profound than mental strength. The demonic magic had a detailed explanation of the attack methods of the consciousness. Han-Shoror recalled these memories and seemed to have grasped something. He felt that the consciousness and mental strength had the same wondrous uses. The difference was that the consciousness was the transformation of the demonic practitioner's soul. Like the demonic infant, it was the most important foundation of the demonic practitioner. The consciousness was even more important than the demonic infant. The demonic infant was the source of the demonic practitioner's power. It provided the practitioner with an endless supply of demonic yuan. Once the demonic infant was destroyed, the practitioner would lose all of his power. There wouldn't be any demonic yuan left in his body, and he would become an ordinary person. The consciousness was the demonic practitioner's soul. Once the demonic infant was destroyed, as long as the consciousness wasn't destroyed, the practitioner could use past experience to rebuild the demonic infant. However, once the consciousness was destroyed, the practitioner's soul would truly scatter, never leaving a trace in the world. On the other hand, Mental strength was the same as the demonic infant. Even if one lost all of their mental strength, they would at most be unable to gather magical elements to cast spells. It would only turn a magus into an ordinary person, and wouldn't take their life. In the cemetery of death, Han Shoror continued to ponder, especially when it came to the detailed theory of attacks on the consciousness. Han Shoror carefully and slowly comprehended it. Gradually, he seemed to have grasped something. When he gathered all of his mental strength and calmed his mind, a thought suddenly leapt into his mind. His mental strength suddenly became very active, and a wondrous fluctuation was suddenly produced. At this moment, Han Shoror quickly chanted a magical incantation. A strange energy was produced out of nowhere and quickly merged with his mental strength. A wave-like impact suddenly appeared, drifting forward like ripples in the water. Oh, there's some progress. What's missing? Han Shoror let out a light breath. He had just felt his mental strength condense and form some kind of tangible attack in front of him. However, since there was no soul in front of him, Han Shoror's attack couldn't find a target. Therefore, he wasn't sure if this attack would be effective or not. It looks like I'll need to find a living person to test it out on, Han Shoror murmured to himself. He thought for a moment and discovered that it was getting late, so he immediately left the cemetery of death. Again, without waiting for a report, Han Shoror directly went to the boot merchant guild and found Phoebe in her room. He asked, "How is it?" "I've gathered some, but due to the lack of time and the fact that the gunpowder is a dangerous item banned by the country, the amount isn't enough to blow up a small mountain. If you give me a bit more time, I can go to a city further away and gather more." Phoebe looked helplessly at Han Shoror and said a bit apologetically, "There's not enough time. Just gather as much as you can. It's best not to let anyone know about this. Otherwise, there might be some trouble." Han Shoror said with a frown. "Don't worry, I'm doing this through a few small merchant guilds. Moreover, I'm secretly buying them in batches. I don't think there will be any problems," Phoebe replied. Afterwards, Phoebe's space ring continuously flashed as bundles of wrapped explosives passed through Phoebe's hand and fell into Han Shoror's space ring. Only when Phoebe had handed all the explosives to Han Shoror did she ask, "Brian, what are you planning to do? You're not thinking of destroying Brett Tell City, are you?" "It has nothing to do with Brett Tell City. I haven't returned there yet," Han Shoror casually replied, hugging Phoebe and kissing her. He said with a smile, "All right, don't worry about me. I know what I'm doing." Under Phoebe's astonished gaze, Han Shoror hurriedly left the boot merchant guild and directly used the transportation matrix in the cemetery of death to return. He quickly flew towards the mountain valley where the mithril mine was. Chapter 295. The night was like water, watering Tanai Mountain. Spring had arrived, and the fragrance of flowers and grass was still intoxicating even at night. Danger lurked in the quiet night, accompanied by the low cries of insects. There were teams of mercenaries stationed in every corner of the mithril mine. The calm was filled with caution and vigilance. A team of black-armored figures were like shadows in the dark night, slowly moving through the lush shrubbery with a sinister and mysterious aura. Dark Grand Magus Edwin floated in the air, leading the way. 300 death guards were like specters, silently following behind Edwin. With Lawton in the lead, the 2,000 Cairo mercenaries followed behind the 300 death guards, slowly advancing towards the mithril mine. Behind the Cairo mercenary band was a group of 10 or so small factions. There were about 1,000 experts wearing mercenary uniforms of various colors. In the valley where the mithril mine was located, the three factions had gathered to guard this place. However, because the three factions still needed to guard their lair, they only had a total of more than 1,000 mercenaries guarding the mithril mine in the valley. These 1,000 or so mercenaries were 3 times less than Lawton's 2,000 elite mercenaries, 300 death guards from the Calamity Church, and 1,000 experts from the 10 small factions. Dark Grand Magus Edwin released a dark magic spell, and a black mass of air slowly spread out. The area in front of the valley that was lit up by the moonlight was suddenly enveloped in a faint layer of mist, as if the moisture of the night was slowly gathering together. For some unknown reason, The insects that had been chirping in a low voice gradually lost all signs of life. Arthur, the wind archmage of the House of Menlo, was currently resting with his eyes closed. He seemed to have sensed the abnormal movements and couldn't help but open his eyes to look outside the valley. He muttered to himself, "What's going on? Why aren't there any sounds of insects around?" In a tent to Arthur's left, the orc warrior Callery called out in a low, muffled voice, "Hey Arthur, it's getting late. Rest early. I feel like something's wrong. I'll go take a look." Arthur mumbled to himself as he walked out of his tent. He used levitation to float into the air and looked out of the valley. Why is it foggy?" Arthur muttered to himself as he slowly floated out of the valley. There were all sorts of tents in the valley, and there were also a few high-spirited mercenaries in charge of night patrols. When they saw Arthur float into the air, the mercenaries in charge of night sentries all greeted him. Some of the Rainbow Sickle mercenaries laughed softly and said, "This fellow isn't sleeping in the middle of the night. Does he want to go out and have fun in the middle of the night?" That's true. It's been hard on us to be assigned to such a place. Who cares? We just need to guard our night. Another mercenary casually replied. Edwin, who was approaching, suddenly let out a soft sigh and made a gesture towards the death guards behind him. The death guards that had been advancing like ghostly shadows suddenly crouched down and retreated, concealing themselves in the lush shrubbery without any signs of life. Lawton's eyes were very sharp, and he immediately waved his hand behind him when he saw Edwin's movements. The long, snaking line was instantly replaced by soft panting sounds. These people were extremely far away from Arthur in the valley, and such soft panting sounds wouldn't be heard at all. Arthur walked out of the valley and gazed into the distance with furrowed brows. He didn't discover anything out of the ordinary, so he stopped for a while and mumbled something before returning to Tarnai. At this moment, the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, the House of Menlo, and the Carter Orc tribe had all gathered according to the distance between them. An orc who was guarding the outskirts of the Carter Orc tribe was suddenly jolted awake by an ear-piercing whistle. By the time he reacted, he discovered that there was a dangling crossbow bolt nailed to a large tree nearby. There was a letter tied to the end of the bolt. Next was the Adam Menlo family. A guard of the Adam Menlo family was also awakened by a crossbow bolt. There was also a letter on the crossbow bolt. Next was the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, which was right next to the Mithril Mine Valley. They were also shaken by the crossbow bolts that carried a letter. The leaders of the three great powers in the Valley of Sunshine were all roused from their various states in the blink of an eye. They hurriedly gathered their men with the letter in their hands and woke up all the sleeping mercenaries. They rushed towards the Mithril Mine Valley at top speed. After delivering the 3 letters of warning with super fast flying spells, Hanshaw once again silently returned to the surroundings of the Mithril Mine Valley and hid himself. All the explosives had been set up in advance, and Hanshaw coldly watched the changes in Tarnai through the 3 Yin demons, waiting for a fierce battle to break out. The 3 powers in the Mithril Mine had more than 1,000 mercenaries in total. Once this force was destroyed by Lawton, it would be difficult for the 3 powers to turn the situation around even if they joined hands. Last time, the 3 powers had gathered at Tarnai Mountain, and Lawton's enmity towards Lawton had made it so that he wouldn't be merciful towards them. Once the experts guarding the Mithril Mine were killed, what awaited them would be even more brutal revenge. Florida and the other 2 were able to distinguish themselves in a place like the Valley of Sunshine, so none of them were stupid. They naturally understood this logic. Holding the attitude that they'd rather believe it, the 3 sent out their experts to communicate with each other. They brought out most of their experts from their lairs and rushed towards the Mithril Mine at top speed. As time passed by in the valley where the Mithril Mine was, some of the mercenaries who'd originally been in high spirits began to show signs of fatigue. They yawned continuously, their mental state at its worst. Edwin, who'd been hiding outside the valley, had already met up with Lawton at this time. He'd been staring coldly at the valley with a dark face when he suddenly turned his head and glanced at Lawton, saying, "We can make our move now." Killing intent burst forth from Lawton's eyes, and even his shiny bald head seemed to sparkle with a cold light. He nodded and said lowly, "My brothers died in this valley last time. This time, I'll make them pay tenfold, 100-fold. Chief Hagen, are you all ready? Don't worry, Chief Lawton, we've long since prepared half of Tarnai's mithril mine. The 10 small powers knew that they weren't as strong as any of the 4 great powers, so they'd all banded together. Hagen of the Flame Mercenary Band was the leader of this alliance. Very good. Not just the mithril mine, as long as you help me annihilate the other 3 powers, you'll take all of their territory. Our Cairo Mercenary Band will still occupy the Valley of Sunshine. I hope you won't disappoint me. Lawton smiled coldly in his heart, but spoke heartily on the surface. Don't worry, we know what to do. Hagen laughed slyly, indicating that he completely understood Lawton's thoughts. All right, enough with the nonsense. Be careful, I'll use a dense fog to cover the path to the valley. Don't make any noise when you enter. It's best if those people all die in their sleep. Edwin yelled impatiently, an unconcealable arrogance in his expression. The Calamity Church was famous throughout the profound continent for being difficult to provoke. Apart from the Church of Light, there were very few powers that could contend against them. Even Lawton wasn't in Edwin's eyes, much less the captains of these small mercenary bands. Therefore, Edwin didn't treat them as sincerely and courteously as he had treated Han Shaw. These small mercenary bands understood Edwin's identity and naturally didn't dare provoke him. Just the sinister and mysterious aura of the 300 Death Guards was enough to make their hearts palpitate. These people had long since heard of the Calamity Church's ruthless and callous disregard for human life. When they saw Edwin's impatient expression, they all softly cried out in agreement. Edwin was still a bit proud of these people's fear. He enjoyed this feeling of superiority in terms of strength very much. He hummed lightly in arrogance and waved his hand, ordering a tall and thin death guard in front of him. Advance, kill them all. The Death Guards were a group of fanatical believers of an evil god. They were fanatical believers who had given all their faith and spirit to the evil god. These people carried the evil god's will and terrifying power, mercilessly massacring all enemies of the Calamity Church throughout the profound continent. They were a group of inhumane executioners who obtained a certain kind of power by offering sacrifices to the evil god, easily possessing the ability to dictate the life and death of others. Under Edwin's command, the Death Guard's grey eyes were filled with fanatical excitement. He was as crazy as Lawton, who had gone berserk 3 times. He gnashed his teeth so hard that it made cracking sounds, as if he was chewing on the bones of some beast or human. His movements were incomparably agile as he led the 300 Death Guards under the cover of the dense fog and rushed towards the valley. The experts of the 3 major powers led by Florida, Adam Menlo, and Carter were currently on their way to the valley. Each of them was burning with anxiety as they continuously gave orders, urging the experts below to move faster, afraid that they wouldn't arrive in time. Chapter 296. Tarnai's forces were either snoring lightly, dozing off, or dead asleep. There were very few who were awake, and 1 or 2 who were more cautious also slowly closed their heavy eyes under the cover of the medicinal mist. Everything seemed so perfect. It was as if the outcome had been decided from the moment the Death Guards had entered the valley. This ambush would have been a classic if it hadn't been ruined by a terrifying explosion. Rumble. Just as the Death Guard passed through the valley's passageway, a fierce gust of wind blew from an unknown corner of the valley. The wind was extremely fierce, first snapping a small tree on the mountainside. A strange butterfly effect was produced, one after another, and in the end, it unimaginably caused the mountain rocks to collapse. The millstone-sized rocks smashed into the valley along the green moss-covered rock walls. The sound of this kind of movement was so loud that even the mercenaries who were sleeping in the mist of potions suddenly woke up as if they were facing a great enemy. The first thing they did was to grab their weapons before looking at the situation that was happening. Edwin, who was also an apothecary but had extraordinary attainments, was well aware that only slightly less effective knockout agents wouldn't be easily detected by experts. Edwin had been feeling smug that victory was in his grasp when the explosion completely shattered his plans. He looked at the mercenaries stationed in the valley, all of them looking around with weapons in hand, and then looked at the Death Guards that had entered the valley. Edwin could only resist the urge to curse out loud and give the order to attack, charge in, kill. Whether it was Edwin or Lawton, they both understood that there was no longer a chance of a perfect ambush due to this change when they heard the sound of boulders rolling down. The two of them cursed inwardly as they gave the order to charge in, but their eyes darted back and forth in the area where the strong wind had come from. Their hearts were filled with a strange sense of doubt. Where did that strong wind come from? Why was it so strong? Why did it have such a miraculous effect? Was it man-made? If so, who could have done it? A series of questions filled their minds in an instant, but it was only for a moment before the two of them stopped thinking about it and focused all their attention on the valley where the massacre was taking place. Enemy attack, enemy attack. Within the valley, over 1,000 mercenaries had been startled awake by the falling rocks. An extremely small portion of the mercenaries near the edge of the valley were constantly dodging the falling rocks. The mercenaries on night patrol duty at the very front had already spotted the death guards and immediately shouted out loud. All the mercenaries of the three factions immediately understood. They pulled out their weapons and started chanting spells. The archers narked their arrows and aimed at the entrance of the valley. The 300 death guards of the Calamity Church spread out like ghosts of the night. They streaked across the moonlight like extremely faint shadows. Their bodies carried a sinister, evil aura, and their eyes were filled with excitement and fanaticism. They held peculiar weapons that looked like spikes in their hands as they flew close to the ground and quickly into the center of the valley. The earth trembled as rows of sharp spikes rose from the ground. Surging flames rapidly converged to form a wide wall of fire to intercept the death guards. Lightning zigzagged above the valley and struck downwards. The watermen and water dragons slowly took form and dashed away from the wall of fire. The shrill whistles of arrows rang out incessantly, whooshing towards the death guards. Tanai Mountain's magi and archers formed a layer of obstruction, instantly blocking the death guards that were rushing over. They wanted to kill all of these audacious invaders. However, as the evil guardians of the Calamity Church, the death guards' infamy had resounded throughout the profound continent for many years. Naturally, they weren't that easy to deal with. Not only did the 300 death guards not slow down, they actually increased their speed. They were wearing a kind of black and grey robes that actually had an extremely strong resistance to magic. Many of the flames that came charging at them were extinguished with a wave of their sleeves. Even the violent lightning bolts that smashed down only caused their figures to pause for a moment. They were far from being able to cause any destructive damage. The armor of the death guards is one of our Calamity Church's secrets. How could ordinary magic attacks have any effect on them? Dark Grand Magus Edwin, who had lagged behind, said disdainfully as he looked ahead with a dark face. They could have silently wiped out most of the forces in the valley, but the unexpected occurrence had disrupted their plans. Edwin was naturally displeased. Next to Edwin, the chief of the Cairo mercenary band, Lawton, gripped the divine weapon of the Berserker tribe, the Berserker's battle axe. He laughed sinisterly. This is good as well. It's just a waste of time. It's more interesting for them to struggle to their deaths. This time, the Cairo mercenary band had mobilized all of their elites. In addition to the Calamity Church's 300 death guards and the alliance of a dozen or so small powers behind them, they could indeed openly destroy Tanai Mountain's forces. Lawton was a battle-hungry person to begin with. This kind of face-to-face, painful slaughter suited his temperament. Therefore, when he saw Tanai Mountain's mercenaries awaken and turn their sneak attack into a frontal assault, he became even more excited. The corner of Edwin's mouth twitched, but he didn't say anything. He looked at the mercenaries surging into the valley like a tide, inwardly planning how to extort Edwin afterwards. After all, it had taken quite a bit of effort to mobilize the 300 death guards this time. Although their goal was the Church of Light, hadn't they also helped Lawton? He had to pay a price. The death guards lived up to their name as the god of death. They charged into the valley with an unstoppable momentum under the surging magic attacks. The 300 death guards immediately split into phantom-like afterimages, leaving bloody holes in the mercenaries' bodies with their sharp, thorn-like weapons. These death guards trained in a strange kind of fighting aura. They seemed to be able to borrow the power of the evil god in battle. There was a natural evil aura on their bodies, and they could actually use their eyes to make people's souls tremble. The strange fighting aura had a strong corrosive power, often able to destroy the opponent's defenses and directly injure the physical body. Sitting cross-legged on a cliff in the valley, Han Shoror was driving the fierce battle as the Hand of Darkness. He was silently circulating his magical yuan, slowly absorbing the lingering power of Tanai Mountain's dead body into his body while paying close attention to the battle below. The miraculous performance of the Death Guards surprised Han Shoror. Han Shoror could even sense a bit of the evil god's aura from these Death Guards. Last time in Valin City, the necromancer Clarendon, who died tragically at the hands of Han Shoror, had used the altar to summon the three-eyed evil god Ansidesi. Also, the aura of the 1,000-meter-tall evil god with green eyes had appeared in Han Shoror's mind in the lower layer of the Cemetery of Death. Han Shoror could sense a bit of it from these Death Guards. Due to their fanatical faith in the evil god, the Death Guards could obtain some of the evil god's strange divine power. Perhaps they could only borrow a billionth of the evil god's power, but this power still couldn't be underestimated in this plane of existence. This could be seen from the miserable deaths of the mercenaries. 300 Death Guards wasn't a lot, but the damage they could cause was incomparably terrifying. The Temple Knights of the Church of Light and the Death Guards were equal in strength. Judging from the strength displayed by these 300 Death Guards, Han Shoror could imagine that the Temple Knight's strength must be equally terrifying. Heh, this is getting more and more interesting. Han Shoror laughed coldly as he muttered to himself. He suddenly called out softly, "What will come, or else it'll be boring." Dark Grand Magus Edwin's brow furrowed as soon as Han Shoror finished speaking. He abruptly used the levitation spell to fly into the air and surveyed the surroundings after exiting the valley. He then quickly descended towards Lawton, who had already charged into the valley and was in the middle of a second berserk battle. He quickly called out, "Large amounts of mercenaries are converging in this direction. What's going on? The Rainbow Sickle mercenary band isn't far from here. They should have discovered us with such a large commotion. Heh, 4 to 500 of Tanai's 1,000 mercenaries have already died. As long as we hurry and finish them off, Florida will be courting death even if he comes. Just his Rainbow Sickle mercenary band alone won't be able to stop our footstep." Lawton waved his berserker's battle axe, directly cleaving apart an orc warrior around 2-3 meters tall. He responded casually and once again charged into the crowd. It looked like he was fighting to his heart's content. No, it's not just the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, there's also a large group of orcs. Edwin was burning with anxiety as he yelled at Lawton. "Damn it, what's going on?" Lawton was startled and suddenly jumped in front of Edwin, asking in shock. "Kill them." Adam Menlo was riding a 10-meter-long flamingo in the air above the valley. Behind him were his clansmen riding all sorts of flying magical creatures. Outside the valley, the muffled sounds of iron hooves pounding on the ground like the beating of drums. The experts of the three powers were converging towards Tanai. Lawton and the others' path out of the valley had already been blocked. "Fight. Otherwise, no one will be able to leave." Lawton naturally understood the current situation and immediately howled towards the sky. His ferocious nature exploded as he charged towards the remaining mercenaries in the valley. Chapter 297. 3,000 versus more than 600, including the infamous 300 Death Guards of the Calamity Church. The difference in strength was completely disproportionate. The remaining 600 people in the valley had long since been destined to die. It was just that they needed to delay it for a few more minutes. Human lives became cheap. Along with ear-piercing screams of misery, mercenaries of different skin colors and races slowly collapsed into pools of blood. Strands of aura that were hard to see with the naked eye rose from the bodies of the recently deceased and gathered at a corner of the valley. As the Hand of Darkness, Han Shoror was extremely happy. He sat cross-legged in an area where no one could spy on him, allowing the three Yin demons to observe the situation. He happily absorbed the strange energy that had yet to dissipate. Han Shoror, who was in the bloodlust realm, was restless, but was firmly suppressed by reason. Time passed as lives were lost. Of the 600 experts guarding the mithril mine in the valley, only 200 remained. Among them, the mags were still tirelessly casting all kinds of magic. Of course, their targets were the well-dressed mercenaries. Not a single one of them wasted any more magic on the death guards. Adam Menlo and his family's elite troops had arrived earlier. They only attacked Tarnai's Lawton's group with magic crossbows from afar, watching the remaining members of Tarnai's family being slaughtered without lifting a finger. It wasn't that they weren't willing, but that they didn't dare. The elites of the House of Menlo who could fly were all riding flying magic beasts. This group of elites was the foundation of the House of Menlo's survival. It was a pity that their numbers were too few, far from Tarnai and Lawton's Cairo mercenary band. Although Adam Menlo's heart was bleeding as the members of the House of Menlo were killed one by one, he didn't dare approach them to save them. This was because he deeply understood that if he landed, what awaited them would be a devastating blow. He was waiting for Florida and Carter's men to arrive and surround Lawton's group from outside the valley. He was waiting for more members who could only travel on land to gather, and then he would explode his accumulated hatred on Lawton's group. "Father, save me." In the middle of the valley, a middle-aged man who looked vaguely similar to Adam Menlo was riding on an armored black bull. He was anxiously looking at Adam Menlo, who was circling the valley on his flamingo. He let out a miserable cry. In front of this middle-aged man, Lawton gripped his berserker's battle axe and grinned as he surrounded him. The other berserkers beside Lawton were also snickering as they worked together with Lawton to keep an eye on him. Lawton wasn't in a hurry to kill him. Instead, he kept looking up at the sky, as if waiting for Adam Menlo to approach. However, after waiting for a while, Lawton only saw Adam Menlo's back turn, his shoulders trembling slightly. It looked like Adam Menlo's heart was twitching, but he had made the right decision. "No." This middle-aged man screamed miserably as he was torn apart by Lawton's battle axe. His scream before his death caused Adam Menlo, who was on the flamingo in the distance, to almost lose his footing. The dull sound of iron hooves could finally be heard clearly. With Florida and Carter in the lead, a large number of mercenaries suddenly charged into the center of the valley. Adam Menlo, who was enduring the pain of being cut by blades, was the first to charge into the center of the valley with bloodshot eyes. Fighting aura shot out from the long spear in his hand, clashing with the flames spewed out from the flamingo and taking a few lives in an instant. An even more desperate battle was taking place in Tarnai. As a spectator, Han Shoror silently absorbed the murderous aura and coldly watched Tarnai's hellish battle to the death, desperately suppressing his strong desire to participate. Time flew by quickly. The already evenly matched battle caused the eyes of several parties to turn bloodshot. This time, 90% of the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had participated. Whether it was for the mithril mine, for the power of the Valley of Sunshine, or for the hatred that had accumulated over the years, they all erupted in the valley. The unyielding life energy of the strong was absorbed to their heart's content. Very soon, the ground of Tarnai was littered with corpses. The corpses piled up and caused the battle to begin. For the sake of profit and hatred, the various races used slaughter to their heart's content to play out this battle. Gradually, as Han Shoror absorbed the enormous amount of energy, a blood-red mist floated around him. The entire sky above the valley was suddenly shrouded in a blood-red mist. That terrifying murderous aura, along with the nauseating smell of blood, enveloped the entire valley. Unfortunately, the various powers in the valley, whose eyes were bloodshot, didn't notice this abnormal change. They still focused all of their attention on the enemy in front of them, using the weapons in their hands, their fists, and even their teeth to attack the enemy. Everyone seemed to have gone completely mad. Han Shoror, who was about to lose control of himself, forcefully suppressed his bloodthirsty desires and finally gave an order to the Earth elite zombie hiding underground. Han Shoror understood that this wasn't the best time because the parties were still fighting. It wasn't time for one side to win yet. In principle, he could still wait a while longer. Unfortunately, Han Shoror understood that his current condition was extremely bad. Absorbing too much murderous aura at once was beyond what Han Shoror could bear. He was deeply afraid that he would lose his reason and not have a chance. 90% of the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had been reduced to a quarter of their original number. This was definitely the most intense battle in the history of the Valley of Sunshine. The major powers that had been fighting to the death suddenly felt the earth tremble violently. However, before they could react, every corner of the valley seemed to be exploding, and the thick smell of gunpowder instantly spread. At this time, there were people fighting in every corner of the valley. Every explosion caused great damage. The mercenaries who were fighting were suddenly engulfed by the underground explosions, their bodies immediately disintegrating into bloody chunks. For a moment, the valley cracked and the mountains collapsed. The sounds of explosions rose and fell incessantly. More than half of the surviving experts in the Valley of Sunshine died in this violent explosion. Due to the underground explosion in the valley, the huge rocks above also cracked. Rocks that were bigger than humans fell like raindrops. The huge rocks fell from a height of several hundred meters. That kind of violent impact was incomparably terrifying. All the experts who were careless and got smashed directly into meat paste. The various powers that had been fighting in Tanai were all dumbfounded by this sudden explosion. Now that 90% of the Valley of Sunshine's forces had joined in, this kind of earth-shattering bombardment didn't differentiate between friend and foe. The damage caused was even more exaggerated. Even if Lawton and the others were slow, they could still sense the scent of a conspiracy. The huge rocks continued to fall from above, and the entire valley was about to be sealed off. All the Tanai experts who had been awakened by the explosion suddenly reacted. All of them looked up to the sky and cursed as they fled in a sorry state. Lawton and the others' voices were even louder as they shouted for everyone to quickly retreat. If it wasn't for the explosion covering up the blood mist, perhaps these people would have discovered Han Shoror's existence. After all, the fiendish Han Shoror had left an unforgettable impression on them with his blood mist attack in this very valley. However, the rolling rocks had shattered the blood mist and could no longer form a distinct blood mist. Add to that the fact that the falling rocks were too terrifying, no one paid attention to the sky. All of them only cared about escaping and didn't expose Han Shoror's existence. The leaders of the major powers sensed that there was a conspiracy, and the resentment in their hearts was as endless as the waters of the ocean. However, they all understood that this wasn't the time to look into it. The group of leaders led by Lawton frantically ordered their subordinates to leave this place as soon as possible. Florida and the others had a bad premonition ever since they'd received the warning of the crossbow bolts. When they arrived in the valley and saw that the massacre had already occurred, and the explosions didn't differentiate between friend and foe, they immediately understood that Tanai's Lawton and the others had also been plotted against. Florida and the others turned pale with fright. They even thought that this was the work of one of the three empires surrounding the Valley of Sunshine. Their goal was to eradicate all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine and take complete control of the Valley of Sunshine. It was because of this that they naturally thought that the explosions were only the beginning, and that there might be a sea of soldiers from the other empires bearing their fangs at them. Therefore, when Lawton fled, they also fled in a panic. They never would have thought that this conspiracy was the work of one person, and that such a large-scale attack was the work of one person and the miraculous Earth Elite zombie. They completely lost their bearings as they fled in all directions. As the leaders of a faction, they naturally thought more, but it was a pity that not every mercenary under their command was that smart. Most of these mercenaries who lived on the edge of a knife were still simple-minded. The fierce battle with Tanai's side had caused their comrades to die one by one, and their enemies to run around them. These people didn't have the time to think and immediately attacked. Thus, even as they fled, the major powers were still locked in battle due to their unresolvable hatred. The sounds of metal clashing and the final screams of the dead continued for a long time outside the valley. However, at this moment, the instigator of all this had turned blood red and was surrounded by a strong killing intent. He was clearly on the verge of a breakthrough. On the contrary, the Demon Slayer Edge hovered in the air above the valley, replacing Han Shoror as the current beneficiary of all the powers. Chapter 298. Corpses were strewn all over the ravaged valley. What was even more frightening was that most of the corpses weren't complete. Their severed heads were like blood-stained rubber balls, scattered all over the valley floor. They formed a stark contrast with the enormous blood-stained rocks. Broken limbs were like powerless tree trunks, quietly lying on the valley floor that had been split into long and narrow ravines. The scene of Azura Hell was serene and bloody under the moonlight. The soul energy that hadn't yet dissipated was drawn by some sort of force from the valley cliff, spiraling from incorporeal to tangible. Wisps of soul energy fluttered into the sharp hilt of the weapon that sparkled with a dark brown luster. The Demon Slayer edge silently stood on top of Han Shoror's head, like a loyal follower of its master. The dark brown edge didn't reflect any luster under the moonlight, but the wisps of soul energy that drifted in and met Han Shoror's murderous aura caused a dazzling change. Specks of star-like light shone brightly within the blood-red aura. The dazzling specks of light were like tiny dancing spirits. After slowly blossoming beautifully for a moment, they finally completely converged into the dull brown Demon Slayer edge. Nearly 2,000 people had died in this battle, and every single one of them wasn't weak. Naturally, their soul energy was also very abundant. 60% of this soul energy had entered Han Shoror's body, and the other 40% was being absorbed by the Demon Slayer edge. As the mastermind behind the scenes, Han Shoror had coincidentally eavesdropped on the battle, causing all the factions in the Valley of Sunshine to suffer great losses. All the leaders were panicking and making wild guesses, which led to Han Shoror's breakthrough into the Bloodlust realm and the Demon Slayer edge's fierce aura once again. Clouds of blood-red mist were so thick that they wouldn't dissipate, forming strange lines that surrounded, entangled, and tightened around Han Shoror. Within the mist, Han Shoror's skin and flesh glowed with a dark red luster as his bones crackled. A terrifying aura of death, murderous aura fluctuated between strong and weak. His handsome face trembled strangely. This state lasted from the long night to the scorching sun. Gradually, the entire ruined valley was shrouded in the blood-red mist. The mist was as thick as a layer of clouds, covering most of the sky above the valley. The scorching sun couldn't penetrate the obstruction of the blood clouds, but instead increased the brightness of the bloody light, causing the entire valley to seem as if it was shrouded in a bloody hell. The corpse-strewn valley seemed even more desolate, evil, and terrifying due to this layer of bloody light. For 3 days in a row, the entire Valley of Sunshine was in a constant state of anxiety and fear. The blood cloud within the valley constantly changed, until blurry, shadow-like figures slowly drifted out from the back of Han Shoror's neck. These shadows that had separated from his body gradually merged with the blood cloud. Then, all sorts of grotesque, ferocious, and terrifying demon heads slowly materialized from illusory form. All of the blood clouds and blood mist merged with the shadows. After 5 days, they finally transformed into 12 monsters of different shapes but all the same sinister appearance. These monsters either had sharp heads and claws, or densely packed fangs like sharks, or had barbs growing out of their backs like barbs. These 12 demons were completely different from each other, but they all shared the same aura. It was a unique aura that came from Han Shoror's body. It was the same aura as Han Shoror's. Little Skull had been hiding in the crevice of the valley all this time. It was because of this familiar aura that the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie didn't make any unfriendly moves. Another 7 days passed. The 12 demons constantly changed their forms, sometimes even taking on the exact same appearance as Han Shoror. What was even more strange was that on the 5th day, there were actually 12 identical copies of Han Shoror hovering around Han Shoror. On the last day, the 12 constantly changing things returned to their original appearances as if they had returned to their original form. Then, they turned into rays of blood-red light and hid within Han Shoror's body. Han Shoror let out a light sigh. After all the demons had hidden themselves within his body, he opened his demonic eyes and swept his gaze across the entire valley. Han Shoror murmured, "I've finally reached the separate demon stage." Due to the enormous explosion, the valley had collapsed amidst the earth-shattering tremors. All of the paths into the valley had been sealed off, leaving only a sliver of sunlight in the sky. During this period of time, the Little Skeleton, Earth Elite Zombie, and Wood Elite Zombie had been guarding Han Shoror with all their might. The various powers in the Valley of Sunshine had sent their spies to investigate not long after the tragedy. Unfortunately, not a single one of them had escaped alive after being ambushed by the three dark creatures. They'd all turned into vengeful spirits like the mercenaries in the valley, and even their corpses were quickly rotting away. The stench of Tanai's rotting corpses was truly unbearable. Han Shoror creased his brow and thought for a moment. He reached out and grabbed the Demon Slayer edge floating above his head. As soon as the Demon Slayer edge entered Han Shoror's palm, it strangely turned into specks of dark brown light and disappeared without a trace. Activating the art of the demonic ninth heavens, Han Shoror broke through the air and left this hellish valley in the blink of an eye. 5 miles north of the Valley of Sunshine, at the top of a low mountain. Lawton of the Cairo Mercenary Band, Florida of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, Adam Menlo of the House of Menlo, and the chief of the Carter Orc tribe had all gathered. The leaders of the various powers in the Valley of Sunshine, including Trunks who had just returned from a mission, were all invited. The leaders of all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine had gathered here. Everyone had ugly expressions, especially the victims who had participated in the tragedy of the Mithril mine. Their faces were especially gloomy as they tried to find the truth and seek revenge, trying to come up with a countermeasure for the future of the Valley of Sunshine. Who is it? Everyone had the same question in their hearts. Apart from the few major powers that had experienced the tragedy and suffered heavy losses, anyone who hadn't participated in the incident had become a target of suspicion. Even some of the smaller factions in the Valley of Sunshine who'd escaped faster and suffered fewer losses had become suspects. Trunks, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band didn't participate in the battle this time. Among all the powers that didn't participate in the Valley of Sunshine, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band is the strongest. Now, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band's strength isn't the slightest bit affected. Due to our heavy losses, your Soul Destroyer mercenary band's strength isn't too far off from ours. It seems that you're the biggest beneficiary this time. I'm thinking, could it be your doing? Florida of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band said sinisterly as he stared at the relaxed Trunks, his handsome face covered with a dark green hue. Trunks, who was inwardly pleased, really didn't know how to repay the mastermind behind the scenes. However, on the surface, Trunks had a pained expression and was still pretending to sigh in pain. When he heard this, he suddenly slammed the stone table and stood up angrily. The hastily assembled stone table suddenly shattered into pieces. Trunks didn't even look at the experts around him blocking the broken stones. He only glared angrily at Florida and shouted, "If you want to spout venomous slander, then we'll fight to the death right now." Half a month ago, our Soul Destroyer mercenary band accepted a mission. All the experts, including myself, left the Valley of Sunshine. Chief Lawton knows this the best. We have the least to do with this matter. Florida, everyone is here today. If you really want to kill me, then we might as well have a fair and square duel. There's no need to resort to such underhanded schemes. When Trunks had slammed his palm on the broken stone table just now, a wisp of silver radiance had appeared in his palm. Everyone present was a crafty old fox. They all knew what a silver fighting aura meant to a swordsman. Due to his own efforts and the effects of the rebirth pill, Trunks had already advanced to the great swordmaster level. All the leaders had to carefully consider whether this palm strike had any other meaning other than a show of force. During this period of time, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band had been able to openly recruit experts in the Valley of Sunshine due to Trunks' previous fame and the foundation of the original Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. They had developed at a high speed in a short period of time. If it wasn't for Tanai's tragic accident, perhaps the Soul Destroyer mercenary band wouldn't have been taken seriously by Lawton, Florida, and the others. It was a pity that Tanai's side had suffered disastrous losses. The strength they had accumulated over the past few years had been destroyed in a single day. With their sharply reduced strength, they no longer had the confidence to firmly deal with Trunks. In addition, the Soul Destroyer mercenary band was in the dark. The various powers still didn't know where their nest was. This caused the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to become a powerful existence that could stand shoulder to shoulder with the four great powers. The great Swordmaster Trunks had displayed his extraordinary strength as soon as he made his move. He had taken an unyielding and formal challenge to Florida. This attitude was clearly different from his previous concealment and obscurity. Although Florida, a light archmage, had also cultivated lightning magic, he had yet to completely recover from the serious injuries he had suffered at the hands of Han Shaw. Florida didn't doubt that Trunks would take the opportunity to tear him to shreds when he faced Trunks, who had advanced by leaps and bounds to become a great swordsman, with Trunks' unforgettable hatred for him. Therefore, Florida's cheeks trembled with anger as he gloomily glared at Trunks. In the end, he said in a low, stiff voice, "The most important thing right now is to find the mastermind behind the scenes. I don't have the time to fight with you right now." When these words were spoken, all those in power in the Valley of Sunshine understood one fact. Florida was afraid. Chapter 299. Trunks didn't persist and sighed, "As a member of the Valley of Sunshine, I'm also very sad that such a tragedy has occurred. The most important thing now is to understand everything. Otherwise, if the enemy has other tricks up their sleeves, then the successive blows will be unbearable for any side." None of the leaders believed Trunks' lament. As the leader of the Soul Destroyer mercenary band that was completely unscathed from the great changes in the valley, they definitely wouldn't believe that Trunks wasn't rejoicing in others' misfortune. Of course, at this moment, especially after Trunks had displayed the strength of a great sword master, they naturally wouldn't be so foolish as to provoke him. After an awkward silence, Lawton of the Soul Destroyer mercenary band finally spoke. "I think the murderer's target this time is all the powers in the Valley of Sunshine." The Soul Destroyer mercenary band being able to escape this calamity was completely a fluke. Even the subordinates I sent to the valley after the incident didn't return. This time, our Valley of Sunshine may be facing a huge problem. If it wasn't for the fact that both sides had suffered heavy losses, the various powers that had been engaged in a bloody battle a few days ago would never have such a friendly conversation in a place like this. Florida of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band shot a rude glance at Lawton, a trace of hatred mixed in his hazy face. He said in a cold voice, "So what do you think we should do?" Taking a deep breath, Lawton seemed to have already thought of an answer. His large bell-like eyes scanned everyone before he finally said in a low voice, "Let's put aside our grudges for now and find the mastermind behind all this. Whoever can figure out the truth first will be the one to take control of the Valley of Sunshine. Do you have any objections?" Lawton, who had always been in control of the Valley of Sunshine, was definitely not a generous person. In fact, Lawton was famous for being petty and mad. Logically speaking, these words shouldn't have come out of his mouth at all. However, the strength of the Cairo mercenary band after the great changes in the valley was far from what it used to be. Although the other three parties had also suffered heavy losses, the Cairo mercenary band wouldn't be able to withstand them even if they relied on the superior terrain of the Valley of Sunshine. Rather than that, he might as well happily release the authority that he might not be able to hold and use the future authority of the Valley of Sunshine as a bargaining chip to lure the three factions, causing them to split up over this authority that they couldn't hold for the time being. Although Lawton's limbs were well developed, his mind wasn't simple. On the contrary, being able to sit in such a high position in the Cairo mercenary band, Lawton had the mind of a schemer. Almost as soon as Lawton's words fell, the eyes of Adam Menlo and Carter, who'd originally been following Florida's lead, immediately shot out a glint of ambition. The two of them were silent for a while, and looked at each other. They didn't look at Florida's desperate wink, and actually agreed very readily. The leaders of the small forces that were originally tied to Lawton hesitated for a moment before nodding their heads one by one. When Trunks saw that most of them were nodding their heads in agreement, he also gladly agreed. When everyone's gazes landed on Florida, who originally had the highest chance of obtaining this power as long as Adam Menlo and Carter supported him, could only agree bitterly in his heart even though he secretly cursed all the relatives of his two previous allies. Even he, Florida, had no choice but to submit to the irresistible trend. Very good, then we can discuss the details now and even draft up an agreement. All the forces in the Valley of Sunshine will be supervisors to prevent anyone from going back on their word when the time comes. Lawton's face darkened as he grinned and proposed in all seriousness. This kind of agreement was as laughable as a prostitute saying she was still a virgin. However, there were times when it was necessary. Although everyone understood that the agreement would immediately be torn apart as long as one side was strong enough, it still needed a ceremony after all. Especially when everyone had a hidden enemy, this would always give them some psychological comfort. Therefore, the major forces in the Valley of Sunshine, each with their own ulterior motives, came to an agreement that they had to abide by. In such a place, all parties would temporarily stop fighting and fully focus on tracking down the mastermind behind the scene. After learning everything from Trunks, Hanshoro gave a strange, non-committal chuckle. He didn't give any explanation to Trunks and quietly left the Valley of Sunshine, this enormous maelstrom that everyone thought of as the mastermind. Trunks' heart trembled slightly at Hanshoro's hair-raising smile before he left. He looked at the trace of pride in Hanshoro's eyes that was difficult to detect, yet also seemed to be deliberately revealed. He suddenly seemed to have grasped something. However, Trunks didn't ask any questions. Instead, after Hanshoro left, he led the Soul Destroyer mercenary band to carry out the magnificent feat of searching for the culprit with great fanfare. He appeared to be even more diligent than Lawton and the others. However, during this process, Trunks, who was openly searching for the culprit, took advantage of the convenience of coming and going to continue his shady business of recruiting soldiers. The Soul Destroyer mercenary band, which had ample funds and was gradually becoming famous, actually attracted quite a few strong experts to join them. After leaving the Valley of Sunshine for 7 days, Hanshoro returned to Osen City. He gave some instructions to the housekeeper of his mansion, then secretly left through the Dark Mantle's transportation matrix. Brettel City wasn't a solid city. Due to the habitual weakness of the previous city lords when facing the invasion of the 7 Grand Duchies, Brettel City's city guards had become a motley crew. Once a true attack descended, the soldiers, who knew how to preserve their strength, would always flee faster than the civilians. It was precisely because Brettel City was habitually breached that the Lancelot Empire didn't dare to spend a huge amount of money to build a transportation matrix within the city. After all, once the Grand Duchies occupied Brettel City, if there was a transportation matrix within the city that led to other places, no one could guarantee that the invaders of the 7 Grand Duchies wouldn't be able to easily enter the other cities and towns of the Lancelot Empire through the transportation matrix. Brettel City was indeed barren, but the Lancelot Empire also had many rich and prosperous cities. If these invaders really did enter the other cities and towns of the Lancelot Empire in large numbers through the transportation matrix, then no one dared to imagine the damage that could be caused. Therefore, as a city that was almost abandoned, this double-edged sword of the transportation matrix project had always been in a state of limitless shelving. Spring has truly arrived, but it's a pity that the scenery isn't pleasant at all, Hanshoro muttered to himself as he sat in a carriage, gazing at the scenery along the way through the opened carriage curtain. Starting from the transportation matrix in Seamist City, which was close to Brettel City, Hanshoro had been sitting in the carriage as it slowly drove towards Brettel City. Along the way, beggars wrapped in cloth loitered all over the place. Flies fluttered in the air above the conspicuous corpses on the side of the official road, causing a choking stench to persist. Seamist City was a well-defended and wealthy city in the east of the Lancelot Empire. However, the miserable scene on the road from Seamist City to Brettel City was as different as heaven and earth from the Seamist City he'd just left. During the 3 days of travel, Hanshoro had already discovered more than 10 bandits causing trouble through the Yin Demons. These bandits were only local bandits of the Lancelot Empire. They weren't fake bandits like those from the 7 Grand Duchies, who might have regular soldiers disguised as bandits. Even the tenacious Hanshoro couldn't help but be a bit stunned by the various tragic scenes. Along the way, Hanshoro had personally killed no less than 50 beasts in human skin. "Brian, I didn't think that your territory would be this kind of place. The scenery along the way is enough to challenge one's nerves. I think that Brettel City will also make you feel embarrassed." Chester, who was determined to follow Hanshoro no matter what, had given up a good mission led by Emily and willingly acted as a coachman to stick to Hanshoro, insisting on coming to this notoriously chaotic and filthy Brettel City. Chuckling lightly, Hanshoro looked playfully at the courageous Chester and asked, "Chester, why do you insist on following me, even when I've refused?" Chester, who was focused on acting as a coachman, had already become extraordinarily resilient along the way. He whipped the warhorse fiercely, stopping the extraordinary warhorse Curiosity towards a corpse in the grass on the left. He replied like a philosopher, "If you want to obtain more things, not only do you need perseverance and indomitable will, you also need at least a little bit of foresight." Interesting thinking. Hanshaw responded to Chester's reply with a faint smile. His eyes calmly watched the civilians around him fiercely fighting over a piece of bread. His voice was elegant, gentle, and indifferent. The situation in Brettel City was so bad that apart from some of the original residents who were unwilling to leave their ancestral lands, some special merchants who tried to use violence, and the nobles and soldiers who couldn't leave due to their duties, the rest of the civilians were trying their best to break free from the shackles of sin. They desperately wanted to enter the rich and peaceful Sea Mist City. However, the road to Sea Mist City wasn't peaceful. Even if they risked their lives to reach the city gates, they would still be mercilessly turned away if they didn't have an expensive entrance fee. These civilians of the Lancelot Empire would be left to fend for themselves. After all, the poor civilians would only become the most despicable and unstable beggars in Sea Mist City. With Sea Mist City's capacity, it couldn't have too many beggars that would affect the city's image. Therefore, even the nobles and merchants could enter the city. The civilians of Brettel City who could prove that they had the ability to live could also enter after paying a considerable fee. Otherwise, even if they died outside Sea Mist City's gates, the guards wouldn't feel the slightest bit of pity. "So this is my territory, I've finally arrived," Hanshaw muttered to himself as he gazed at the wide-open Brettel City in front of the dilapidated city gates. Chapter 300. A carriage that couldn't be considered extravagant sped through the dilapidated city gate. There were few people on the streets. Occasionally, one or two people could be seen with eyes full of resentment and despair. This was a silent protest against their miserable lives. Brettel City was just as dirty as Hanshaw had expected. The scenery was only slightly better than what he'd seen along the way. A few lazy soldiers watched the carriage enter the city indifferently. They actually didn't question him about his origins or urge him to pay the entrance fee. It looked like Brettel City was indeed on the verge of death. "Hey, may I ask where the city lord's mansion is?" Chester pulled on the reins and asked a commoner who looked like a beggar with a smile. The commoner lay lazily under the sun, picking at the fleas on his body. He didn't even raise his head as if he hadn't heard Chester's question. "1 silver coin, where is the city lord's mansion?" Chester, who'd been born in poverty, had a good understanding of the temperament of these poor people. He asked with a smile again. Sure enough, adding a silver coin immediately produced an effect. The beggar who'd just been deaf seemed to smell the alluring scent of gold. He suddenly focused all his attention on Chester and pointed in the direction of East Street, saying, "Go straight for 300 meters. The tallest and most dilapidated mansion is the city lord's mansion." A silver coin glittered under the sunlight as it rolled down to the ground in front of the beggar. Chester didn't thank him. He only jerked his warhorse and the carriage slowly left, heading straight for the city lord's mansion. The beggar hurriedly picked up the silver coin and clutched it tightly in his palm. He then looked in the direction the two had left in and murmured, "Someone actually came to Brettel City. If it's not a profiteering merchant, then it's that legendary unlucky count. What a pitiful fellow." Once Brettel City was invaded, the city lord's mansion would become the focus of attention. The walls of the tall building weren't sturdy, and there were even a few holes that hadn't been repaired from the explosions. When Hanshaw's carriage entered, there were only less than 5 maids and a dozen or so soldiers. These maids and soldiers looked at Hanshaw coldly. They did not have the enthusiasm that a subordinate should have. Of course, it was even more impossible for them to welcome Hanshaw at a banquet that was normally held in other regions. The city lord's mansion was at least 5 times larger than Hanshaw's mansion in Ossen City. However, this city lord's mansion didn't have any good points apart from its large size. Because the city lord was always the first to leave after every invasion, the city lord's mansion that didn't have any soldiers stationed there was often the first to be looted. Some of the things that the city lord couldn't take away for the time being had been completely obliterated in the repeated attacks. The funny thing was that Han Shao actually saw a piece of white jade floor being taken away, leaving behind a large square hole in the ground. This allowed Han Shao to imagine the true situation of Brettel City. "Can you tell me about the current situation in Brettel City?" Han Shao asked Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle, after hearing the news and sitting down in the dilapidated hall at the center of the city lord's mansion. Dick was a man in his 40s. His appearance was ordinary, with only the bridge of his nose appearing rather high. This was a characteristic of the mountain people of Brettel City. Dick respectfully saluted Han Shao, speaking in a somewhat awkward imperial language. When the previous city lord of Brettel City left, he took with him a total of 500 family soldiers. Currently, there are only 3,000 soldiers in the entire Brettel City, and less than 50,000 residents in the city. 3,000 soldiers is simply not enough to guard Brettel City's city gates. Not to mention that these soldiers often escape faster than the civilians. Brettel City's defenses have been damaged time and time again. Without funds to repair them, the city has almost lost its defensive capabilities. The true local mountain people of Brettel City mostly live on the steep mountains around the city. These mountains produce some valuable ores. Since the mountain people are very familiar with the terrain of the mountains, coupled with the fact that the mountains are indeed very difficult to attack, they have been able to resist every invasion by the 7 Grand Duchies. Up until now, Brettel City has actually been relatively safe. This is because the 7 Grand Duchies have experienced dozens of large and small invasions. They all understand that there's no more profit to be reaped from Brettel City. To them, wasting time to plunder Brettel City is no longer able to reap the rewards they deserve. Therefore, there haven't been any more invasions in the past few months. On the contrary, the mines guarded by the mountain people in the mountains around Brettel City have become the targets of attacks by bandits and private soldiers. However, the mountain people are not as incompetent as the Empire's soldiers because they have the geographical advantage. Up until now, they have been able to barely pass through the mountains at the speed of a turtle. Han Shao gradually gained an understanding of the situation in Brettel City under Dick's introduction. When Dick finished, Han Shao glanced at a soldier in the city lord's mansion and said, "Summon all the soldiers of Brettel City to the front of the city lord's mansion. I want to see what these soldiers look like." "Yes, Lord Count." The soldier replied lazily, riding a weak and thin horse at a moderate pace out of the city lord's mansion. "My lord, you will be disappointed." Dick shook his head and sighed as he said to Han Shao, "I know. However, I want to make sure that I won't be disappointed in the future," Han Shao said with a light smile, then furrowed his brows in silence. After nearly 2 hours, the soldiers scattered all over Brettel City gathered in front of the city lord's mansion at a moderate pace, with no order or military discipline. None of these soldiers were very strong. Perhaps it was because of the food they ate, but they had a sickly complexion. That kind of sloppy mental state without a trace of a soldier's spirit was proof that their combat strength was bound to collapse at the first blow. The long swords, bows, and spears in their hands were all rusted and of inferior quality. Han Shao even felt that a sharp weapon forged by the dwarfs could break all of their weapons. Only a third of these 3,000 soldiers were young men in the prime of their lives. The rest were old men past their prime. Who could count on these people to have any fighting strength? Han Shao stood on the high platform of the city lord's mansion for a while, pondering for a while with a calm face. He grinned maliciously and said, "From today onwards, your good days are over. All soldiers over the age of 50 will be expelled from this troop. I will guarantee that these people will have a normal life. The remaining soldiers will be given enough food to fill their stomachs. You will also be given brand new weapons, armor, and war horses. Of course, you will also be tortured by cruel training. When the next invader comes, you will wash away the previous shame with blood. With me here, Brettel City will change." The elderly soldiers below were incessantly clamoring. They were indifferent to Han Shao's proposal to have them leave the army, but were full of doubts about Han Shao's guarantee of food and clothing. The young soldiers looked at each other in dismay, slowly pondering the meaning behind Han Shoror's words. They didn't know what he wanted to do. Beside Han Shoror, Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle here, looked at Han Shoror in astonishment and asked, "My Lord Count, are you serious? Your Lordship, even if we have more than 1,000 people with weapons and war horses, do you think that we can withstand the attack of 10 to 20,000 bandits or the 30 to 50,000 regular soldiers of the 7 Grand Duchies with such a dilapidated city wall?" A soldier with a rough appearance and a full beard shouted as he looked up at Han Shoror. "This isn't something you should care about. As a soldier, if you can't stop the enemy's invasion, then use your own heads to wash away the shame of failure. If you dare to struggle at death's door and flee, I'll personally slit your necks." Han Shoror looked coldly at the brawny man and berated. "City Lord, I think you should leave this place as soon as possible. This place has already been abandoned by the Empire. Do you think you alone can change the current situation of Brettel City? Without 100,000 elite soldiers of the Empire standing guard, Brettel City will never be able to change the situation of being invaded. If you want to court death, please don't take us with you, okay?" The soldier was extremely disdainful, turning a blind eye to Han Shoror's coldness as he retorted. Whoosh! A dark brown luster flashed past. No one could clearly see what it was, but the head of the soldier who'd been arguing with Han Shoror fell to the ground just like that. Fresh blood spurted out from his neck like a paintbrush sketching a bright painting on the ground. "From now on, all you have to do is listen to orders. You don't need to have any doubts. Even if you do, just rot them in your hearts." Han Shoror's voice was strangely cold and murderous. That kind of ruthlessness was like that of a butcher's, causing the soldiers below to keep quiet out of fear. A troop of more than 100 people riding brightly colored war horses and wielding bright weapons slowly rode towards the city lord's mansion. One of them was wrapped in silver armor and held a silver spear. He bowed slightly towards Han Shoror and said, "Sir Count, Earth Knight Fork will serve you and obey all your orders." Han Shoror didn't need to think too much to know that this fork must have been arranged by Lawrence. Han Shoror could feel the murderous aura of a fierce warrior from this person. He understood that this person was a true soldier who'd experienced hundreds of battles. Han Shoror immediately looked at the Brettel City soldiers below with malicious intent and laughed mischievously. "Fork, from today on, I'll leave them to you. Use the cruelest methods to train them. I won't blame you if they die during training." Chapter 301. Brettel City had become somewhat different. The commoners in the city dressed like beggars often saw scenes that were different from the past. The soldiers who used to live like cowardly worms in Brettel City were now full of vigor, as if possessed by ghosts and gods. They would actually line up in neat lines, panting and running while carrying heavy loads, or practice sword skills in the city lord's mansion that had been repaired. These originally cowardly and incompetent soldiers had a trembling and fearful expression on their faces, but under the ruthless training of a team of silver-armored knights, they gradually gained a bit more backbone. Their originally sallow and emaciated faces also gained a bit more firm lines. These changes happened inadvertently. Not only did the soldiers in the city change, but other places in Brettel City also had subtle changes. For example, the broken city gates and broken city walls had been repaired by some retired soldiers who had spent a lot of time. The city lord's mansion in particular seemed to have suddenly regained its vitality. The people coming and going were actually a bit disorderly. The commoners of Brettel City, whose hearts were like dead ashes, didn't feel much when they saw these changes. They were used to the city lord being the first to run away, so they didn't feel that these changes would have any effect. On the contrary, they had some malicious guesses that these actions might bring harm to them. The bandits and soldiers of the 7 Grand Duchies, who hadn't visited the city for a few months, might think that there was more profit to be made from the changes in the city. If they were in the mood to come here and plunder again, it would be another miserable experience. Inside the city lord's mansion, Han Shoror slowly walked out of his secret room one morning. Fork, Dick, and Chester were waiting in the living room. Han Shoror looked at the three of them and moved his space ring. Shining weapons and bags of food slowly piled up. He looked at Fork and said, "Make full use of these weapons and chariots. You also have to control the food. In addition, from today onwards, as long as it's a young and strong commoner, you can join the army. Apart from a guaranteed food allowance, each person will be temporarily given 1 gold coin each month. As an Earth Rider, Fork naturally had extraordinary abilities since he was able to be arranged by Lawrence. During this period of time, Fork had already killed a few of the soldiers due to the high-intensity training. However, the deaths of these soldiers had an immediate effect. In a short period of time, all the soldiers truly understood the cruelty of training. Not a single one dared to make up the numbers. During the day, Fork madly drilled these soldiers, and at night, he even lectured some high-ranking soldiers on military strategy. Han Shoror had listened for a few days and felt that he had benefited greatly. He felt that this Fork was indeed a trustworthy officer. Understood. Fork wasn't a person who liked to talk too much. Under normal circumstances, he had an old-fashioned look on his face. He had a straightforward and hot-blooded aura that was ingrained in his bones as a soldier. Dick, have there been any abnormalities in the vicinity recently? Han Shoror asked with a smile as he glanced at Dick, the person in charge of the Dark Mantle's operations here. My Lord Count, apart from some commoners who don't understand your actions, there hasn't been anything out of the ordinary around Brettel City. However, according to our Dark Mantle's observations, I believe that a group of bandits will arrive in the next few days. Of course, their target should only be the mountain people on Mount Talai near Brettel City. Dick replied courteously. Although the soldiers of Brettel City were cowardly and incompetent, the Dark Mantle was still operating normally. There were Dark Star envoys hiding in the surrounding mountains. Nodding, Han Shoror said with interest, "Very good. Keep a close eye on this matter. You must find out when those bandits will return, as well as their numbers and movement routes. Hihi, Fork, perhaps we should also test out these soldiers. If we don't give them a bit of stimulation, I think it will be very difficult for them to truly grow." My lord, your words make a lot of sense. I will make them more spirited. Fork replied. 3 days later, on Mount Talai to the southwest of Brettel City, a battle that frequently occurred was currently playing out. Redbeard Troder was leading 4,000 fierce bandits, recklessly charging up Mount Talai. The mountain people hiding in the rocks, trees, and shrubs on the winding mountain path used bows and arrows to obstruct the bandits from ascending the mountain. The mountain people had long since gotten used to this kind of attack and naturally had their own way of dealing with it. The falling rocks and arrows caused quite a bit of damage to the bandits. The mountain people hiding behind the rocks were much braver than the soldiers of Brettel City. They didn't fear the bandits' attacks at all and used all kinds of attacks to attack the invaders. Fork, do you think these bandits will be able to win? At the foot of Mount Talai, Han Shoror was a distance away from the bandits. He turned his head to look at Fork and asked. Shaking his head, Fork calmly replied, "Impossible. Although Redbeard Troder has more bandits, it's a pity that the mountain people of Mount Talai occupy the terrain. In addition, they've long since gotten used to fighting on the mountain. It's impossible for war horses to travel on the rugged mountain path, and Troder doesn't have the determination to fight to the death. This battle is destined to be fruitless. Only 100 of the 4,000 fierce bandits have died. Hihi, Fork, do you think we have any hope of getting rid of them?" Han Shoror asked again. That's also impossible. The path below Mount Talai is flat and we don't have any terrain that we can use to our advantage. In addition, these soldiers haven't been trained for long. I don't think they have the courage to face the Redbeard bandits immediately. Not to mention we only have 1,300 people. My lord, this isn't a good idea. Fork was shocked and immediately tried to persuade Han Shoror. Unfortunately, Han Shoror didn't listen to Fork's advice. He laughed mischievously. "Fork, you've forgotten that I'm an Archmage Necromancer. Archmage Necromancers should be most proficient in this kind of large-scale battle. Not to mention, there aren't any outstanding light Archmages among these bandits. I think we can give it a try." Before Fork could stop him again, Han Shoror had already walked out with a smile. As he walked towards the Redbeard bandits, Han Shoror ordered, "Attack with me. I think you know what to do." Han Shoror took out the skeletal staff from his space ring and chanted a low incantation. Dark creatures appeared one after another. With the existence of the skeletal staff, the power of a summoning spell was doubled. With the 10 evil knights in the lead, 50 hate warriors, 200 zombie warriors, 700 skeletal warriors, and 300 gargoyles were summoned by Han Shoror using the skeletal staff and expending a large amount of mental strength. More than 1,200 dark creatures, including the terrifyingly powerful evil knights and hate warriors, as well as the fiercely whistling gargoyles, lined up neatly and marched towards the bandits under the command of Han Shoror's skeletal staff. When Fork saw that so many dark creatures had appeared under Han Shoror's incantation in just a few short minutes, Fork's expression became somewhat dazed. Only when Han Shoror's figure was about to disappear from his line of sight did he suddenly react. He abruptly roared at the fearful soldiers behind him, "Today is the day to test the results of your training. You've all seen the City Lord's methods. I don't doubt that he has the strength to kill all of you by himself. Any coward will meet a miserable end. Therefore, all of you can only listen to my command and attack." When the originally trembling soldiers heard Fork's roar and saw the sinister expression on Han Shoror's face as he brandished the skeletal staff, their hearts suddenly turned cold. Courage and fear strangely converged together, and all of them inexplicably gained the courage to fight. They tightly gripped the weapons in their hands, their gazes resolute. They were prepared to not fall into the hands of the City Lord even if they had to die in battle. The little skeleton, whose body was covered in sparkling white bones, rode a peculiar undead creature that was 5 meters long and 3 meters tall. Its body was covered in sharp bone spurs. This creature looked like a giant hedgehog that had been magnified 1,000 times. It dragged a tail that was covered in thorns and thorns. It only had a single grayish-white eye that emitted a deathly stillness. The Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie were each riding a fire-spitting, black-armored warhorse that only evil knights could possess. They stood on either side of Little Skull. The 3 little things were actually even more arrogant than the 10 evil knights. They actually appeared at the very front of the group. What was strange was that the 10 evil knights didn't show any dissatisfaction and obediently followed behind Little Skull and the other 2. What's that? A cowardly bandit at the back suddenly heard a muffled sound behind him. He turned his head and was immediately dumbfounded, screaming out loud. The sullen and irritated red-beard Troder stood on a rock and roared. When he heard his subordinates' shouts, he immediately cursed, "Stupid pigs, charge up. Boss, look behind you." The bandit was frightened out of his wits as he pointed anxiously behind him and screamed. Troder raised his head and saw a dark aura of death rush towards him. A dense horde of undead creatures with an icy aura that didn't exist in this world were marching towards them. Chapter 302. Why are there dark creatures here? Redbeard Troder was stunned. He couldn't help but pause in his actions of commanding his subordinates to attack Mount Talai. He looked at the densely packed undead creatures in bewilderment. "Boss, I think these damned dark creatures are targeting us." The trembling, timid bandit felt as if the warm spring had turned to winter when he was glared at by Little Skull's purple eyes. He felt a bone-chilling coldness. "Light magicians, get rid of these filthy dark creatures." Troder obviously saw that the situation wasn't looking good and roared at the mags facing Mount Talai. There weren't as many mags on the profound continent as there were knights and swordsmen. The fact that there were a few mags in this bandit group spoke volumes of their extraordinary strength. A light journeyman mage and a light adept mage deeply understood that they would be the ones to deal with these dark creatures. The 2 had already started chanting magic as soon as Troder's voice fell. Rays of dazzling light swords and balls of light sparkled with a pure and holy light as they slowly shot towards the approaching undead creatures. The Earth Elite Zombie at the forefront scratched its head foolishly when it saw the light magic descending upon it. It suddenly disappeared into the ground from its flaming black war horse. However, a barrier formed from dust suddenly appeared and blocked most of the light swords and balls of light. A few light swords and balls of light landed among the dark creatures and purified a few skeletal warriors. It was a pity that there were too few of them. Compared to the sea of dark creatures, this level of light magic didn't have much of an effect. After all, the two light mags weren't light grand magi like Ferguson who could cast glorious splendor of light. Facing the attack of more than 1,000 undead creatures, the scattered specks of light couldn't stop the invasion of the undead army at all, especially when there were the three little skeletons who weren't afraid of light magic. Of course, the dark armor of the high-ranked evil knights was also very effective against light magic. Therefore, the entire army of dark creatures didn't stop even a step under the attack of the light swords and balls of light. They continued to charge majestically towards the bandits led by Redbeard Troda. "Stupid pigs, raising you guys is really useless." Troda cursed loudly and pulled out a gleaming, double-edged broadsword from his space ring. He roared at his subordinates behind him, "Come, smash these filthy bones." Troda took the lead and charged out. There were at least 3,000 bandits gathered around him. These bandits, who had no sense of strategy, followed behind Troda like a swarm of bees, fiercely charging at the dark creatures. Fork led a group of terrified soldiers in a completely different direction from the dark creatures. These Brettel City soldiers looked fearfully at City Lord Han Shaw floating in the middle of the undead army. They seemed to remember Han Shaw's ruthlessness. None of them dared to cower. "Prepare the crossbows and arrows. Shoot them to death. You bunch of idiots, focus all your attention." Fork couldn't help but curse loudly when he saw that the soldiers on the battlefield still dared to be distracted and look around. The soldiers, who were used to being cursed, raised the bows and arrows in their hands amidst the curses. They aimed at the Redbeard bandits charging from the foot of the mountain and fired wildly. Although these people's aim wasn't very good, the Redbeard bandits were too densely packed together. As long as the strength of the arrows was enough, they would draw blood when they landed in the swarming crowd. On one side were soldiers who had just been trained for a short period of time and dared to resist the bandits for the first time. On the other side were a group of hot-tempered bandits who didn't know how to fight at all. As the defenders, the arrows and crossbow bolts in the hands of the soldiers had indeed received quite a bit of lethality. Rows and rows of arrows rained down, and more than 300 bandits were killed just like that. Another 500 to 600 bandits were either lightly or heavily injured. The bandits finally charged from the foot of the mountain after paying the price of 300 lives. At this time, the bandits had two choices. They could either attack the Brettel soldiers on the left, or the slowly advancing undead army in front of them. Troda was extremely furious at this moment. He finally recognized that the ones who dared to attack his subordinates were actually the cowardly soldiers of Brettel City. This group of Brettel City soldiers who always fled like dogs had always been a laughingstock among the other Grand Duchies and bandits. However, these soldiers had actually dared to pick up their weapons and attack his subordinates at this time. They'd even caused quite a bit of damage. This was an unforgivable insult to Redbeard Troda. Therefore, Troda, who'd charged from the foot of the mountain, immediately roared madly, "Brothers, chop up this group of bastard." Troda once again took the lead and roared angrily as he charged towards Fork's group of soldiers. He didn't attack the undead creatures in front of him like he'd originally planned. However, even though he didn't attack the undead creatures, the dark creatures controlled by Han Shaw and Little Skull wouldn't let them off in a friendly manner. When the dark green canopy of necromancy covered the bright red light of the evening, a thick aura of death slowly spread out from the canopy of necromancy. The bones of the undead creatures that bathed in the canopy of necromancy all shone with an evil luster. Their slow-moving attack speed suddenly increased by 3 times. Even the sluggish hate warriors started moving as fast as gargoyles. Following a string of cryptic and profound magic incantations, grey liquid rippled out from the water and poured down from the sky. The path the bandits took towards Fork's group of soldiers was filled with acidic swamps that were emitting green smoke. The bandits who'd rashly stepped into the acid swamps suddenly howled miserably. Under the corrosion of the acid swamps, their skin and flesh rapidly fell off from their bones. In the blink of an eye, 50 to 60 living skeletons of all shapes and sizes appeared in the acid swamps. "Damn it, avoid those things that are emitting green smoke." Troda shouted loudly, then glared angrily at Han Shaw, who'd gracefully released necromancy magic. He roared, "Evil necromancer, why do you have to be enemies with us? I've never offended you." Temporarily halting his incantation, Hanshaw glanced at Troda with interest. A charming smile appeared on his face as he said softly, "Brettel City is my territory. Do you think you've offended me by burning, killing, and looting in my territory? Haha, so you're that unlucky new city lord. Do you think Brettel City is Sea Mist City? Do you think a necromancer like you can change the situation in such an abandoned place?" Troda actually mocked when he saw Hanshaw reveal his identity. "How would I know if I don't try?" Hanshaw replied with a light smile. He pointed the skeletal staff in his hand at Troda and ordered, "Children, tear them apart." Little Skull, who was riding on the enormous undead creature, emitted a hazy purple light from his purple demon eye. He glanced at the undead creatures that were swarming towards Troda, his empty right hand abruptly slapping the undead creature beneath him. This undead creature that looked like an enormous hedgehog suddenly shook out 3 pairs of 5-meter-long wings that seemed to be made of green rotting flesh. The enormous undead creature flapped its green wings and directly carried Little Skull into the air, sweeping towards Troda. This was like a bugle call to charge. As soon as Little Skull and the undead creature flew away, the group of gargoyles circling above quickly flapped their bat-like wings and closely followed behind the undead creature covered in spikes, attacking Redbeard Troda's bandits. Floating in the air, Hanshaw sized up the spike-covered undead creature through the yin demon. He didn't know why, but he felt that the densely packed snow-white bone spikes on its body was somewhat familiar. After carefully examining it through the yin demon, Hanshaw suddenly recalled the bone spikes from super-rank magical creatures that Little Skull and the Earth Elite Zombie had collected in the Forbidden Land. Those bone spikes that contained a strange energy were shockingly similar to the spikes on this undead creature. Could it be that this undead creature that I've never seen before was refined by Little Skull? This thought suddenly welled up in Hanshaw's mind for no reason, but was immediately rejected by Hanshaw with a shake of his head. This idea was too outrageous. As a Little Skull that he'd refined, it shouldn't have such a strange ability. "Don't kill him, I want that leader alive." Riding on the strange undead creature, Little Skull quickly flew above Troda. Hanshaw suddenly shouted as he watched Little Skull and the undead creature swoop down towards him. From Dick, Hanshaw knew that this bandit named Troda had looted Brettel City many times in the past few years. Hanshaw wanted this bandit leader, who'd raked in so much wealth, to spit out all the wealth he'd swallowed. After all, Brettel City currently needed a large amount of gold coins. Just the 200,000 gold coins that they'd brought over wasn't enough to sustain the city. Chapter 303. The undead creature that had been charging towards Troda was patted by Little Skull after Hanshaw's shout. Little Skull and his mount suddenly changed directions, circling around Troda and charging into the dense group of bandits. Troda yelled as he shot out rows of arrows. A few of them landed on the undead creature, but unfortunately, they didn't pose any hindrance to it. The undead creature resembling a porcupine charged into the dense group of bandits under Little Skull's control. Fut, this powerful undead creature landed in the middle of the bandits, its sharp spikes piercing through 5 bandits. 3 of them were torn apart by the spikes, while the other 2 were sent flying through the air. 300 gargoyles whizzed over, flapping their bat-like wings as they swarmed forward. Dozens of bandits didn't even have time to defend before they were torn into a bloody mess by their hook-like claws. The dark creatures that couldn't fly, under the lead of the Earth Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie, joined forces with 10 evil knights on fire-breathing black-armored beasts and landed in the middle of Troda's red-bearded bandits. More than 1,000 undead creatures of all kinds charged directly into the middle of the bandits. These undead creatures that didn't fear death didn't feel any pain at all. They either used the sharp weapons in their hands or their claws and teeth to launch a frenzied attack on the bandits. Among them, the skeletal warriors were the weakest. Their bones would often shatter under the powerful bombardment. Apart from this, the higher-ranked zombie warriors' bodies were already very sturdy. The strength of the iron rods they wielded was also very fierce, often giving the bandits a lot of trouble. As for the enormous hate warriors, they were even more difficult to deal with. It often took 4 or 5 bandits working together to barely resist them. Apart from light magic, only fire and lightning magic could harm these powerful undead creatures. Even if some ordinary physical attacks broke the hate warriors' arms and legs, they still couldn't stop their attacks. 10 of the most valiant evil knights raised their enormous white bone spikes. Each one of them possessed great destructive power. With a wave of the enormous white bone spikes, 5 or 6 bandits would be swept to death. The black armor formed by the strange minerals in the Death Abyss was much more resistant to magic than the normal armor in this world. Undead creatures were strange existences that were not easily harmed by physical attacks, so these 10 evil knights were a nightmare for bandits. They couldn't seem to find a way to deal with them. Han-Shoror, who was suspended in the void, waved his skeletal staff and chanted a cryptic spell. The greenish-black canopy of undead was shrouded in a dense death aura. Ripples spread into the air and formed acidic swamps. Undead creatures didn't pose any hindrance to the acid swamp, but once a living person without an aura of death fell into the acid swamp, their skin and flesh would immediately melt. "You damned stupid pigs, do you only know how to watch from the side?" Fork cursed loudly and pointed his silver spear at the bandits. He roared, "Aim and shoot." There were more than 4,000 savage bandits, and their strength couldn't be underestimated. Han-Shoror had also summoned more than 1,000 undead creatures, but most of them were the lowest-level skeleton warriors. However, these skeleton warriors were the weakest in terms of battle strength and often couldn't pose any real threat to the bandits. Therefore, it was impossible for the undead creatures to completely annihilate this group of 4,000 bandits with just the few hate warriors and evil knights. Fork roared as rows of arrows landed among the bandits and even the undead creatures. For high-level undead creatures like the hate warriors and evil knights, a few arrows wouldn't cause them any harm. Therefore, even if their attacks missed, they wouldn't cause much damage to the undead creatures. The novice archers heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that the hate warriors were still able to attack the living people around them without any problems even after a few arrows pierced into their bodies. They were able to fire freely. Now that they no longer had any worries, the archery skills they'd gradually grasped during their daily training slowly came into play. More and more of the Redbeard bandits were killed under the rain of arrows. Han-Shoror, who'd been coldly observing the entire battle situation, suddenly had a thought. The magic that had been scattering through the acid swamp temporarily stopped, and a narrow, winding path appeared from Troda's side to Fork's side. The narrow path could only fit 3 or 4 people, but it seemed to leave some hope of attacking Fork's group. "Attack! Kill these damned cowardly soldiers of Brettel City." Troda pointed at Fork. The bandits that had surrounded him charged towards Fork with Troda in the rain of arrows. The soldiers, who'd gradually gotten used to the oncoming charge, mercilessly sent even more arrows towards Troda's group. The charging bandits fell to the ground like porcupines, their bodies full of arrows, javelins, and spears. Their deaths were also strange. On the mountainside of Mount Talai, the leader of the mountain people, Fulkin, who was tall and had a high-nose bridge, wore a set of armor that was not considered rare. He looked at the chaotic battle at the foot of the mountain in confusion and said, "What's going on?" Fulkin was the leader of the mountain people on Mount Talai. He'd lived on Mount Talai for the past few years, exchanging ore for daily necessities. This group of about 1,000 mountain people had been reduced to less than 600 in the constant fighting. If it wasn't for the mountain's terrain, they would have long since been breached by the bandits. "I don't know who that necromancer is, but those soldiers should be from Brettel City. Oh, how dare these Brettel City vermin take up weapons? My eyes must be playing tricks on me." The old miner Turiaf stood on tiptoe on a tall rock, looking down with the same puzzlement. "I've heard that Brettel City has a new city lord. Does this new city lord really want to change Brettel City?" Fulkin couldn't help but exclaim softly, astonishment in his eyes. "Rumor has it that the new city lord is called Brian. He seems to be a necromancer and has even killed a great swordmaster of the Brut Merchant Alliance. He's a demon who's challenged many experts of the Empire. No one has been able to escape from his palms, leaving no one alive in every battle. Turieff couldn't help but remind Fulkin when he'd heard some news from Ossen City from some merchants who'd recently come over. As the master of the mountain people on Mount Talai, Fulkin thought for a moment with a dark expression, then said, "That damned bandit Troda has killed many of our people. Even my younger brother died in his hands. No matter what, Troda's situation isn't looking good now. It looks like we don't need to stay on the mountain to defend." "Fulkin, you mean we should charge down the mountain and fight to the death with Troda?" Turieff was startled and asked. Nodding, Fulkin snorted and suddenly shouted, "Perhaps today is the day for us to take our revenge. That damned bandit Troda has killed too many of our people. Don't let him leave Mount Talai alive." Fulkin walked out from behind the rock after he finished speaking and charged towards the parties fighting at the foot of the mountain. The mountain people who'd been hiding among the rocks and shrubs suddenly erupted with accumulated hatred when they heard Fulkin's words. They followed behind Fulkin and charged towards Fork's group. For Fulkin and the others, it was best not to get too close to strange existences like the undead creatures. After all, these creatures didn't belong to this world. It would be a waste if they attacked them as well. In addition, there were many acid swamps of various sizes in the middle of the undead creatures. Dozens of white skeletons that had just shed their skin and flesh could be seen in the acid swamps. This horrifying scene was extremely shocking to them. They naturally wouldn't want to come to such a dangerous place. Whoosh whoosh. 2 bone spears shot out of nowhere. Troda, who was advancing, suddenly felt pain in his legs. Then, dozens of gargoyles swarmed him. Before he could react, they grabbed him with their iron claws and spiraled him into the sky. "I'm the new city lord of Brettel City. My name is Brian. Nice to meet you, Troda." Han Shoror's voice sounded courteously. When Troda reacted, he found that Han Shoror was looking at him with a faint smile. For gargoyles' iron claws had pierced through his back. The 4 gargoyles flapped their wings to keep him from falling to his death. "What do you want?" Troda was indeed a bandit leader. Even though his back was dripping with blood and in great pain, Troda's expression was still fierce as he glared angrily at Han Shoror and roared, "I don't want anything, I just want all your wealth. Everything you've plundered from Brettel City all these years, spit it all out." Han Shoror was in a good mood as he chuckled lightly. "Just kill me, I won't give it to you even if I die. Haha, you won't be able to obtain that wealth." Troda laughed maniacally, as if he didn't know how to spell the word death. Fut. 3 bone spears pierced through Troda's abdomen and chest. Han Shoror smiled faintly. "You seem to have forgotten that I'm a necromancer. Necromancers not only have powerful control over dark creatures, but are also very familiar with souls. Even if you die, I can still obtain everything from your soul." Chapter 304. Boss is dead. A bandit suddenly screamed when he saw Troda being pierced by 3 bone spears. Faced with the undead creatures and Brettel City's soldiers, the bandits had all lost their will to fight after Troda's death. The fearless bandits suddenly began to think about their own lives. No one thought of avenging Troda, each and every one of them fled in a panic. A hazy green shadow was wrapped up by necromancy magic released by the skeletal staff. Han Shoror solemnly chanted a cryptic incantation, absorbing the memories in the soul's mind. After a while, Han Shoror waved the skeletal staff and the soul turned into green smoke that dissipated. The gargoyle grabbed Troda's corpse and brought it in front of Han Shoror. Han Shoror reached out to take the space ring from Troda's corpse, then casually tossed the corpse away. Having obtained Troda's memories regarding wealth, Han Shoror let out a light sigh of satisfaction and looked at the chaotic battle in the distance. Under the undead creature's attacks, a portion of the Red-Beard bandits who'd suffered heavy losses rushed to Fork's side. Under Fork's command, the soldiers who'd been hiding in the distance and shooting arrows fearfully switched their bows and arrows to broadswords and spears. With Fork's 100 experienced knights leading the charge, they attacked the bandits charging over. Fulkin and the mountain people of Mount Talai also rushed down from the mountain, joining forces with Fork and the soldiers of Brettel City. They encircled and annihilated the Red-Beard bandits who'd lost their will to fight after their leader's death. Han Shor controlled the situation through the 3 yin demons. He knew that the bandits were destined to suffer a crushing defeat this time. The undead creatures still died one by one under Han Shor's command. Having reached the separate demon realm, Han Shor no longer needed the power of these souls. However, the Demon Slayer edge in Han Shor's chest was still working, silently absorbing the energy that was hard to see with the naked eye. Han Shor hovered in the air until he discovered that the bandits had escaped from the undead creature's area. He discovered that Little Skull was riding that strange giant hedgehog among the undead creatures, howling as he chased after the bandits. The Earth and Wood elite zombies were together with the 10 evil knights, also hunting down the bandits. After an order was passed down, the remaining skeleton warriors and zombie warriors squatted down in the area and began to collect the spoils of war from the bandits' corpses. Weapons, leather bags, and even some good clothes were taken out by these competent undead creatures and piled up according to Han Shor's orders. After the bandits had escaped, the canopy of necromancy that hadn't been replenished by Han Shor's mental strength gradually dispersed with the wind. When the sunlight shone down, the corrosive liquid of the acid swamp gradually sank into the ground. The white skeletons that had been maintaining their strange postures cracked and shattered with a loud rumble. The outcome of the battle had been decided, and there were no more surprises. Of the 4,000+ bandits in this battle, over 2,700 had died here. The rest had fled in a sorry state without a trace. All the spoils of war of the dead bandits had been gathered up and handed over to Fork for safekeeping. Nearly 200 of the Brettel City recruits who'd participated in this battle had died in the face of the savage bandits' attacks. On the other hand, only 50 of Fulkin's mountain people had died. This was enough to prove that this group of cowardly soldiers had very poor combat ability. Respected Lord Count, thank you for your help. Fulkin arrived in front of Han Shor after the dust had settled and bowed respectfully towards Han Shor. No need to be polite. Mount Talai belongs to Brettel City. As the city lord, I have the responsibility to protect your safety. Han Shor replied with a smile, then added, I hope this is a good start. Brettel City is also your hometown. I don't think you have to stay in Mount Talai forever. Perhaps we will return to Brettel City, but now isn't the best time. Lord Count will surely understand our concerns. A single battle wouldn't be able to make Fulkin feel at ease. Fulkin definitely wouldn't dare to take the risk before Brettel City displayed its formidable military strength. Nodding, Han Shor smiled, you will see the changes in Brettel City in the future. All right, today's matter ends here. I still have other matters to take care of. Ignoring Fulkin, Han Shor walked over to Fork and instructed him to clean up the battlefield. He then left by himself, heading in the direction of Helen Duchy. Han Shor had already learned the location of the bandit Troder's hidden wealth. Apart from the few crystal cards in his space ring, Troder hadn't sold the rare jewels and ores he'd plundered over the years. Instead, he'd buried them in a barren mountain. Troder had originally been a criminal of Helen Duchy. Due to the succession of Helen Duchy's Grand Duchess Helentina, he'd been pardoned and released. Troder had left the prison and returned to the free world he'd been away from for many years to become a bandit. However, even though Troder had been wreaking havoc all over the place, he still couldn't forget his hometown. He'd hidden his wealth in a barren mountain not far from his hometown. The current Grand Duchess of Helen Duchy, Helentina, was rumored to be an enchanting woman. This woman's methods were exceptional. She'd sat on the position of Grand Duchess under the covetous eyes of many uncles, becoming the de facto ruler of Helen Duchy. None of the uncles who'd fought with her for power had escaped her grasp. They'd all been killed after she'd ascended to the position. Helen Duchy, humph. Han Shor snorted coldly as he flew through the dusky sky, secretly considering when to make a move against Helen Duchy. Although Helentina was a woman, Helen Duchy was in her hands. Those troops didn't have any benevolent hearts. Among the 7 Grand Duchess invasions of Brettel City, Helen Duchy was equally frequent. Helen Duchy was located to the northeast of Brettel City. It was more than 700 kilometers away from Brettel City. It would take a day to reach the duchy on horseback, but Han Shuro only spent about an hour using the art of the demonic ninth heavens. When Han Shuro arrived at the Barren Mountain, he discovered that a large-scale battle involving 4 duchies was currently in full swing. Helentina, whom Han Shuro had just secretly cursed, was valiantly sitting on a fiery red phoenix, calmly commanding the soldiers to attack. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.